Alone in a dim, candlelit chamber, Zeno held his sword close, tracing its blade in silence. He recalled the vow he made long ago, his entire existence bound to Lord Atlas. The memory broke when Atlas called his name, snapping Zeno back to the present. Atlas informed him the army would move out at first light. He ordered Zeno to lead the vanguard, break the enemy lines, and kill General Garzas for House Arclight's glory. Kneeling, Zeno absorbed the warning not to fail, resolve burning in his eyes. Years before, on a freezing snowy night, Atlas had found him abandoned and taken him in. That single act had given a broken boy a reason to keep living. Zeno silently vowed his whole life now belonged to Atlas alone. Snapping to attention, he answered without hesitation, "As you command." Under the open night sky, Atlas stepped out of the tent with Zeno following close behind him. On the battlefield, Zeno tore through enemy soldiers, his blade cutting down one after another. Blood sprayed across the field as he pressed deeper, unrelenting, his eyes burning red with focus. When the dust settled, Zeno stood alone among fallen enemies, sword still dripping with blood. Riding at the head of the charge, he kept cutting down enemy after enemy without pause. Leading the vanguard, Zeno pushed forward into the enemy ranks, sword raised high. Everything he had built for House Arclight flashed through his mind in that instant. Coughing up blood from the strain, he refused to slow down. His loyalty had become a blade, one forged by carving away pieces of his own soul. Gathering all his strength into a single strike, he unleashed the technique known as Phantom Shadow. Enemy cavalry charged from both sides, but Zeno stood his ground, blade drawn, ready for the clash. Watching from afar, Arclight knights recognized his swordplay, admitting it wasn't a style that belonged to their house. Wounded and coughing blood, Zeno pressed on while nobles nearby sneered, calling him low-born filth not worth approaching. Exhausted and bleeding, he gritted his teeth, refusing to let his body give out. Just as he caught his breath, a second wave of enemy soldiers appeared on the horizon. Watching the new threat approach, Zeno realized the situation had turned dangerous. He knew his strength was nearly spent, able to unleash Phantom Shadow only one more time. High on a distant ridge, Atlas watched the battlefield, his expression unreadable. Steeling himself, Zeno answered the silent order the only way he knew, "As you command." Even if this life would be spent entirely, he vowed to see the battle through. Watching from a distance, Atlas stayed silent as Zeno tore through the enemy, screaming that it was all for him. Atlas's expression darkened, murmuring that things were unfolding just as he expected. A strange golden light began leaking from Zeno's body as he fought, something he clearly despised. Atlas signaled to hooded figures behind him, declaring it was time, warning that any further and Zeno would stop being a usable tool. At his command, one of the hooded figures raised a blade, ready to strike. A sudden burst of energy exploded around Zeno, catching him completely off guard. Chains of dark power wrapped around him as he realized it was the black binding array, demanding to know why this was happening. His eye burned with fury as blood sprayed, the betrayal cutting deeper than any wound. Reality blurred around him as pain and confusion consumed his senses. Gripping his sword tighter, a voice mocked him, declaring it was too bad for him now. A soldier raised his axe overhead, calling Zeno a monster before the enemy troops gathered behind him. The axe came down, striking Zeno as he collapsed, blood spraying across the ground. Standing over him, the attacker laughed, saying he was only fulfilling a promise made to Zeno's master, telling him to direct his resentment elsewhere. Lying broken, Zeno struggled to understand, wondering if Atlas himself was truly behind this. Armored figures approached slowly, their footsteps echoing as Zeno's bloodied face stared up in disbelief. A cold voice called his name as he lay defeated beneath their shadow. Atlas himself stood over him, declaring that his role had finally ended. Zeno struggled to speak, calling out to Atlas as father, refusing to accept what was happening. Atlas's gaze turned venomous, warning him not to misunderstand their relationship, calling him nothing more than an orphan. Coldly, Atlas admitted he had never once considered Zeno his son. Blood pooled beneath him as Atlas coldly stated he felt not even a second of regret. Atlas recalled the snowy day he first found Zeno, remembering the moment he looked into his lifeless eyes. He recalled thinking, in that instant, that this particular child stood out from the rest. Atlas admitted he had judged the boy would make a fine tool for his purposes. His plan was simple: give him a reason to live, and he would repay it with dog-like loyalty. In the end, Zeno had only ever been a convenient sword to wield. Yet Atlas admitted that for a tool, Zeno had turned out a bit too well made. He recalled the strange spiritual energy Zeno carried since childhood, something abnormal even then. Atlas revealed he had used every method within his power on the boy, all to suppress that power until now, though it seemed his efforts wouldn't hold forever. Watching Zeno's overwhelming energy, Atlas admitted he had reached his own limit, calling that light the ultimate proof of the boy's overflowing power. Atlas stated it was only a matter of time before Zeno bared his fangs, though Zeno weakly insisted he would never dream of betraying him. Bleeding and desperate, Zeno screamed that it would never happen. He collapsed further, blood spraying as his strength gave out completely. Calling him noisy, Atlas said he'd share one last truth, what the name Zeno truly meant within their house. The answer was cruel. It meant nothing more than a disposable sword. Around them, the Arclight Knights burst into mocking laughter at his expense. Fading, Zeno confessed this life, and this sword had been dedicated entirely to Atlas alone. Suddenly, a blade struck down one of the men beside Atlas, shocking everyone present. Barely conscious, Zeno murmured one broken word, Fen, before falling silent completely. Zeno lay bleeding on the ground, barely conscious, as another blow struck down beside him. The man who struck him laughed nervously, admitting Zeno had genuinely scared him during the fight. Broken and dying, Zeno reflected bitterly, calling himself a stupid monster given the first reason to live he'd ever known. That reason, he realized, was only meant to make him a disposable tool, as the soldier screamed at him to just die already. Surrounded by mocking knights, he understood fully that he had only ever existed to be used and discarded. Lying in his own blood, he questioned everything he had ever fought for. Drifting away, he wondered if this warmth meant he had finally reached the afterlife. A new scene revealed a banner bearing the crest of the Elminster family, the continent's strongest mages. A gentle voice welcomed him, saying he was finally awake. A woman leaned close, calling him her sweet little baby. Realization struck him hard. He had somehow become a baby. Panicking, he stared at his own small hands in disbelief. Held in a stranger's arms, he demanded to know what was happening. Two great houses divided the empire, the House of Arclight, which worshipped the sword above all else. Across the divide stood the Elminster family, who believed true power lived in magic alone. Legend held that Elminster's founder shaped a continent with a single spoken chant. His spiritual energy was said to rival the light of the sun itself. A newborn lay in his mother's arms as a bitter thought stirred, the sword saint reborn into his rival's bloodline. A soft light pulsed faintly within the infant's small body. His golden eyes snapped open, sensing something long buried inside him. Spiritual energy surged endlessly, refusing to be contained. He realized this was the very power stolen from him in his past life. A quiet smile crossed his face. The heavens hadn't abandoned him yet. Born into the perfect environment and the greatest bloodline the Empire had ever seen. With limitless spiritual energy at his command, he vowed to use every resource he now possessed. His true goal remained fixed on one target, revenge against Atlas. To reach that goal, he first needed absolute control over the entire family's power. His eyes lit up at the sight of a jeweled cup and a golden drink placed before him. Maids and servants lined up, presenting him with the finest treatment the estate offered. The head chef announced proudly that the drink had been prepared just for Lord Lucius. They explained it was special baby food made from sap harvested straight from the world tree. A maid urged him to open wide and drink it down. Another maid rushed in with a jeweled rattle, insisting the spiritual energy poured into it by the staff all night made it the better gift. The chef and the maid argued fiercely over which gift deserved his attention, leaving him overwhelmed on the floor. His mother stepped in, laughing softly as she told the staff to settle down before they overwhelmed little Lucius. She turned to him with a knowing smile, asking if that wasn't right. He told himself not to misunderstand. An orphan like him knew better than to expect this kind of warmth. He reasoned that all the affection being showered on him was tied only to his potential for magic. Memories surfaced of his past life, bleeding out alone on a battlefield with no one by his side. The maids cheered as he rolled over for the first time, and he decided to use this environment purely to fuel his revenge. A week had passed since his reincarnation, and he had come to understand one clear truth about his new life. The Elminster family's magical talent and training methods exceeded anything he had imagined. A single bottle of milk here carried a massive amount of spiritual energy, prepared fresh by the maids each day. His mother rocked him gently as her maid hummed lullabies laced with the rules of magical incantation itself. Surrounded by watching maids, he crawled across the floor, still not fully used to acting like a baby. Alone at last, he reached out a small hand, deciding it was time to test his current power. He recalled the true essence of Phantom Shadow, the technique he mastered in his past life, built on condensing power into a single point. He intended to do with his spiritual energy exactly what he once did with his sword. He focused every ounce of his current spiritual energy, determined to bring it under perfect control. The strain showed on his face as energy surged violently beyond his grip. A blinding pillar of light tore upward through the room, shaking the walls around him. The burst of energy shot straight through the mansion, lighting up the night sky above the estate. Inside the kitchen, a chef nearly dropped his knife in shock, while his mother and her maid rushed toward the source of the blast. The blast of light tore through the sky above the city, visible for miles beyond the estate. He marveled at how much his spiritual energy had grown in just 1 week. The scale of his own power left him stunned, barely able to process what he had unleashed. He told himself that if he could just manage to control it completely, everything would fall into place. His mother burst through the halls in a panic, rushing toward his room after hearing the crash. She found him fast asleep, calm and undisturbed, leaving her to wonder if the noise had only been her imagination. She watched him sleep, smiling softly and wondering what kind of dreams he was having. A maid burst through the door, startling her as she cradled him in her arms. The maid delivered urgent news, breathless and wide-eyed, about something involving the royal family. She told the maid to calm down and asked what exactly had happened, holding him close as she waited for the answer. A maid rushed in, announcing that a delegation escorted by the royal guard had arrived at the estate gates. His mother questioned aloud who this appraiser could be. She wondered why such a visit would come without notice, especially with the family head away. He realized quietly that his spiritual energy from the previous night must have been detected, and things had just grown complicated. The staff lined up in the great hall as she waited, holding him close in her arms. A hooded figure stepped through the entrance, flanked by 2 silent guards. He addressed her formally as Lady Elminster. He stated they could skip the pleasantries, since he had come bearing an imperial decree. He revealed that the previous night, the Empire's spiritual energy surveillance network had detected something. An unprecedented surge of spiritual energy had erupted from their territory, an anomaly on a scale seen perhaps once in 1,000 years. The hooded appraiser raised his hand, declaring that the source of the spiritual energy was right there. He confirmed it was somewhere inside the Elminster family estate itself. The staff whispered among themselves, unable to believe where the energy could possibly be coming from. He warned that if their appraisal determined the source to be a threat, action would follow. He stated that under imperial law, they would be forced to carry out its purification. The red-haired maid gasped, refusing to believe such a thing could be true. He reminded the mother coldly that this was simply their duty to perform. He held up the appraisal orb, identifying himself and his men as the appraisers assigned to the task. The orb's needles spun, confirming that the source was definitely located somewhere within that very hall. He turned toward Lucius, the orb glowing brighter as it pointed directly at him. The appraiser addressed her directly, asking Lady Elminster to please step forward. She agreed calmly, holding her son close as she prepared to follow. The maid pleaded softly, promising everything would be fine and asking her to watch over Lucius. The appraiser apologized formally before raising the orb toward her. The orb spun against her, then abruptly declared that the source was not her ladyship after all. He muttered to himself, demanding to know where on earth the true source could be coming from. The orb suddenly flared to life in his hands, catching him off guard. A blinding beam shot upward from the device, illuminating the entire hall around the gathered staff. He staggered back as the light overwhelmed him, sweat forming on his brow. Cracks spread across the orb's surface as it burned brighter, threatening to break apart entirely. The orb shattered violently, unleashing a blast of light straight at the appraiser's face. A terrifying thought struck him as he stared at the sleeping infant nearby. The mother turned in shock, realizing the source everyone searched for was this very infant. In the grand hall of the Arclight estate, a burst of golden light tore through the air as a robed mage unleashed his power. A guard recoiled in shock while a maid shielded a small blonde infant in her arms, the boy watching the chaos unfold around him. The mage studied the shattered remains of a protective artifact, stunned that something built to withstand even elite spellcasters had crumbled from the sheer pressure radiating off the child alone. Determined to understand what he was facing, the mage declared he would abandon caution and bind his own soul directly to the infant's to uncover the truth hidden within him. A summoning circle blazed to life beneath him as he reached toward the floating child, beginning the ritual to expose the boy's true nature. Energy erupted violently the instant the connection formed, lightning and light colliding in a storm of raw power. The mage recoiled, shaken by what he was sensing, unable to comprehend the force pouring out of something so small. As he pressed deeper into the child's spirit, he recognized something impossible about the soul before him. Overwhelmed, he strained against the sheer density of the boy's spiritual energy, unable to locate the very core of his soul. At the center of the storm, something dark and unfamiliar pulsed within the light, filling him with dread. Later, a noble woman approached him, demanding to know exactly what he had witnessed inside the child. He recalled the sacred duty of the Empire's appraisers, sworn to guard against a specific ancient threat. That duty existed to prevent a prophecy sealed away in a tome written at the Empire's founding. The book foretold the greatest calamity the Empire would ever face. Its warning spoke of a holy soul concealing an abyssal curse, one destined to plunge the Empire into ruin. Facing the boy's parents, the mage confirmed the truth. What he'd seen matched the prophecy exactly. The women beside him recoiled in horror, refusing to accept it. He declared the curse within the child to be the spark of the empire's eventual destruction. By the crown's authority, he vowed to extinguish that spark before it could ever ignite. Years later, shadows would fall across the faces of those who once judged him, their identities obscured by the weight of what was to come. The boy's eyes flashed gold as tension gripped the hall, the maid holding him close while the men in black robes closed in around them. A tense silence settled over the room as everyone waited for what would happen next. The blonde noblewoman stepped forward, her voice carrying absolute authority as she declared she would not allow anyone to touch the child. The lead appraiser questioned her openly, asking if she truly meant to defy imperial law itself. She stood firm, insisting that a single tear from her child mattered more to her than any law the empire could impose. She looked at him with quiet conviction, stating plainly that this was simply what it meant to be a mother. The appraiser studied her, asking whether she understood the consequences of the path she was choosing. Wind and light surged through the hall as the standoff reached its peak, the household staff watching from behind the noblewoman. The appraiser and the noblewoman locked eyes, magic crackling around his clawed hand as the tension between them sharpened. One of the black-robed men turned to him in disbelief, questioning whether he truly intended to let the family go free. The appraiser lowered his head, quietly repeating the word law to himself. He explained that the law commanded him to remove the seed of calamity, yet he wondered aloud whether something raised in such deep love could truly become the disaster foretold. Later, the noblewoman walked with her maid, declaring she had decided to see the truth of the prophecy herself. She and the appraiser faced each other in silence, the weight of the decision hanging between them as he addressed her formally as Lady Celestia. He acknowledged her resolve, recognizing that she was prepared to turn her back on the empire itself for the sake of her child. He then made his own decision, stating that he would share that burden with her. He warned that if the child ever strayed from the right path, they would bear the responsibility together, then asked if she agreed to those terms. As the group departed, he turned back one last time, telling her not to forget what had been promised. The doors closed behind them as the noblewoman stood resolute, the maid cradling the child at her side. Startled, she turned sharply, her eyes wide as something unexpected caught her attention in that instant. Celestia rushed forward through the hall, calling out for Lucius as the maid held him close. Relief washed over the boy as he pressed his hands to his face, murmuring his gratitude and speaking his own name under his breath, still shaken from whatever had happened. The maids gathered around him, expressing their relief that he had come through safely. Celestia broke down in tears, holding him tightly against her as the weight of fear finally left her. The boy sat quietly afterward, his golden eyes distant and troubled beneath his tousled hair. Elsewhere, a man asked the appraiser if he was certain about the decision he had made, and the appraiser answered without hesitation. He instructed that word be sent to the king, describing the boy as an exceptional talent who would benefit the nation in time to come. 12 years passed, and Lucius stood alone on a narrow platform suspended by chains, surrounded by circles of blazing magic descending from above. Light and energy converged around him as he stood motionless at the center of the storm. He extended his arm, drawing more power into himself, demanding even more from the forces swirling around him. He reached upward, pushing his focus to its absolute limit under the crushing tension of the technique. Each surge pulled him closer to the edge of collapse, the boundary between mastery and destruction growing thinner. His feet touched down hard on the platform as the surrounding energy sharpened, his power refining itself through the strain. Exhausted, he staggered and caught his breath, sweat clinging to his face as the chains beneath him swayed. Celestia and her maid watched him from below, calling his name with quiet concern. She admitted her worry aloud, troubled that he kept pushing himself through such reckless training again. Lucius answered simply, telling her he was fine. He continued walking across the chain, remarking that he had repeated this same routine every day for 12 years. Wind and light coiled around him again as he moved forward, undeterred by the exhaustion still lingering in his limbs. Below, Celestia and her maid walked on together, watching him continue his relentless path toward strength. The maid scolded him for smiling so proudly, warning that letting his guard down was the most dangerous moment, recalling the 3 times she had nearly died as a magic knight because of that exact mistake. 12 years had passed, and she was still lecturing him, arms raised in frustration while Celestia looked on with quiet amusement. She addressed him formally as young master, remarking on how he had trained this way every single day without fail. She stepped forward and handed him a sealed letter, telling him it was meant for him. He took the envelope and examined the wax seal, sensing its importance before opening it. He smiled, recognizing that everything he had endured had been building toward this exact day. The letter revealed itself as an invitation to the Royal Academy selection ceremony, the gathering place for the Empire's finest talents. A framed portrait hung nearby, honoring the Academy's top graduate from years past. Tradition held that whoever earned that title would receive a blessing capable of surpassing normal human limits. Even Atlas Arclight, who had once graduated at the very top of his class, had claimed that same honor before him. A knight recognized him from a distance, calling out his name in alarm as blood and force collided around him. Atlas dismissed the damage entirely, his power radiating with an intensity that defied ordinary human comprehension. Clenched fists tightened with resolve, driven by the goal of claiming a blessing strong enough to finally rival him. His expression hardened, declaring that he would first claim the top standing within the academy itself. The Royal Academy stood before him, its towers rising above the grounds where the ceremony would soon begin. Inside a massive arena, the ceremony's grounds stretched out beneath banners and cheering crowds. He walked forward among the other selected students, his expression calm amid the surrounding energy. A voice cut through the noise, commanding silence as the ceremony reached its opening moment. The king himself observed from his throne, declaring that the Royal Academy selection ceremony had arrived. With a burst of light and power, the ceremony was formally declared underway, as a massive beast-like manifestation surged across the arena floor. The selection ceremony began under a wide, sunlit sky. Students gathered in the academy's stone courtyard, murmuring among themselves as officials called them forward one by one. Among them stood a blond boy with sharp golden eyes, silent and composed, watching the ceremony unfold around him. A voice rang out across the arena, announcing that this year's exam would test two things, protection and suppression. Wooden beams and debris shattered through the air behind the boy as the trial ground itself seemed to react to the coming challenge. A massive spectral dragon coiled above the arena, its eyes burning yellow. An instructor with pale hair explained that each examinee would be responsible for the safety of the sage's eggs floating around them during the trial. The threat was named a crystal lizard, a magical beast summoned to attack. It roared as it burst free of restraint, and a girl nearby steadied herself for the danger ahead. A red-haired girl and a hooded figure watched from the sidelines, tension in their eyes, as the exam's outcome would soon be decided. Above the arena, a golden set of scales appeared, shimmering with light, the scales of judgment, meant to weigh each examinee's performance. One side of the scale represented protective power, meant to shield the fragile eggs from harm. The other side measured suppressive power, the strength needed to subdue the beast itself. Both evaluations would combine, adding weighted results to the scale to determine each student's final standing. Officials explained that passing depended entirely on the total weight placed on both pans, then dismissed the examinees to the waiting area. Whispers spread through the waiting hall as students noticed the blond boy standing apart, someone muttering that he was the cursed child of the Elminster family. A red-haired girl sneered nearby, remarking that if not for the royal appraiser's mercy 12 years earlier, he would already be dead. The boy walked forward regardless, unshaken, while a crimson-clad figure watched him from a throne-like seat with quiet interest. The trial began. The red-haired girl, Lilia Magnate, was announced as the first challenger, launching herself into battle wrapped in flame. She unleashed her fire against the beast, shouting for it to burn to ashes as the flames consumed the air around her. The explosion of fire and force rocked the arena, Lilia's power tearing through the creature with brutal intensity. The beast was overwhelmed, flames swallowing it whole as the arena shook from the impact. Her results appeared: suppression rank A, protection rank D. She passed. The dragon-like beast returned for the next challenger, and a hooded figure raised a glowing hand, power surging forward as the announcer called for the next trial. The results flashed above: protection rank A, suppression rank C. Another pass, closing this chapter of the selection ceremony. A blue-haired student summoned twisting vines of green energy, controlling them with practiced precision as his trial began. Another examinee, a brown-haired girl, launched a blazing arrow of light across the arena, her stance firm as the attack tore through the air. A dark-haired girl with a ponytail gathered a sphere of violet energy in her hands, her expression calm and focused as the power built around her. The crowd noticed a striking figure walking into view. Silver hair, sharp red eyes, a crimson coat. Students whispered his name. It was Lord Hector. Onlookers murmured that Hector Gilbert was rumored to be the new generation prodigy among the Empire's swordsmen, a name already spreading through noble circles. From a distance, Lucius Elminster observed him, quietly noting that Gilbert was a family he had never heard of in his previous life. The beast Hector faced roared, summoning a concentrated orb of dark energy. He dismissed the need for spellwork entirely, relying only on his blade. A bold title appeared over him as he moved. The sword of my family, his coat trailing as he closed the distance to strike. His grip tightened around the hilt, eyes burning crimson, promising to end the fight in one decisive, silent motion. He unleashed his attack, and the beast's roar shattered as red-white energy tore through the arena around him. A colossal beam of destructive force ripped upward from his blade, splitting the sky and reducing the arena's shadows to scattered lightning. As the dust settled, Hector stood composed, his blade sheathed, the beast's essence shattered like broken glass behind him. Above the arena, the golden scales shifted, weight after weight dropping onto both sides as his results were calculated. His score illuminated the sky: suppression rank S, protection rank A. He had claimed first place, undisputed among the examinees. Students in the crowd murmured in disbelief, admitting they hadn't even had time to blink before his performance ended. Then, the officials called forward the final examinee of the day, Lucius Elminster. As he stepped forward, hushed voices spread through the noble spectators, sneering that the Elminster family's cursed child had finally appeared. From his seat, Hector remarked coldly that after his own overwhelming performance, nothing left could possibly measure up, wondering aloud what the boy could even attempt to show. His crimson eyes lingered on Lucius with quiet contempt, certain the trial ahead would end in failure. The beast surged forward, unleashing a concentrated blast of energy. Lucius stood still at the center of the arena, calm and unshaken as the attack approached, ready to answer the challenge everyone believed he could never pass. A maid with red hair carries a girl with long blonde hair on her back, both fleeing through a storm. Fear is written across their faces as something behind them forces them to run. A monstrous shadow rises against the storm, gathering a blinding surge of purple energy between its claws. A lone boy stands far below, watching the colossal force take shape. At the academy grounds, the principal turns to another official and questions how first-year students are meant to survive an attack of that magnitude. The official, a green-robed instructor, admits that under normal circumstances, the proper method would involve raising a wide defensive barrier first to shield the dragon eggs from harm. High above, a boy plummets through the dark toward a ring of eggs suspended in the void. As he falls, his eyes sharpen with cold, golden focus. The dragon guarding the eggs notices something moving fast toward it, confusion flickering across its reptilian face. The boy spins through the air, his blade catching arcs of purple energy as he deflects them one after another, undeterred by the chaos surrounding him. Onlookers in the stands watch in disbelief as the scene unfolds far below, murmuring that what they're witnessing shouldn't be possible. The bearded instructor studies the boy's technique closely, realizing he isn't chanting any spell or building a defense. What he wields isn't structured magic at all, just raw threads of spiritual energy, yet he commands them with flawless precision. The girl continues falling through the storm, and it looks as though the boy is plucking every drop of rain from the sky around her as he moves. A hand reaches forward, a small point of light igniting at its fingertip. The dragon rears back, its jaws crackling as it gathers another burst of destructive purple energy. The boy hangs upside down mid-air, surrounded by a blinding burst of blue light radiating outward from his blade. A single command halts the dragon's rampage, freezing it mid-motion as its energy cracks and stabilizes. The dragon staggers back as the boy lands, sprinting toward it without hesitation. From high above, the arena reveals just how small the boy looks next to the massive creature sprawled beneath him. Rows of towering staffs crowned with glowing blue orbs shake violently, clashing against each other in the chaos. One golden staff crowned with a brilliant blue jewel stands amid the wreckage, radiating light. Nobles in the crowd gasp in shock, while a red-haired woman below turns furiously toward a hooded figure watching from the shadows. A golden staff crowned with a glowing S rank rating hovers in the light, marking a perfect result in both defense and suppression. The crowd reacts as a blonde boy stands before them, identified as Lucius Elminster, the top incoming student of the year. Back at the estate, a maid with red hair throws her fists up in celebration while a blonde woman covers her face, overwhelmed at hearing Lucius's name. A gloved hand tightens with restrained emotion beside a stern young man in a military uniform, while elsewhere a fierce woman with pale hair and red eyes glares with quiet intensity. At the academy grounds, an official steps forward to announce the presentation of the medal for the top incoming student, with rows of new students gathered below. Lucius stands apart from the other students, his expression calm and distant, while an elderly official with a crimson headdress watches over the proceedings with a stern gaze. A brilliant crest ignites in green light, cradled by a hand reaching upward as power gathers around it. Kneeling amid swirling green energy, Lucius channels the force flowing around him, his expression composed despite the storm surrounding his body. The bearded official announces the award ceremony has concluded, adding that starting the next day, something new awaits. The academy tower stands tall against the sky as the announcement declares that academy life is about to begin. Staff direct the first-year students to their assigned rooms, while a hooded figure walks alongside a red-haired woman through the crowd. The red-haired maid pauses, her expression softening with quiet emotion as she reaches toward someone close to her. She speaks with fierce sincerity, telling the young master that although the servants cannot witness his heroic journey firsthand, they will wait eagerly for the day they see how far he has grown. She passes along a message confirming his admission to the school, and Lucius quietly thanks her, promising to do his best. The blonde woman holds his face gently, asking if he is truly leaving now. She tells him that even if she warns him not to push himself too hard, he likely will not listen anyway, and asks him to stay safe, reminding him that many others are hoping the same for him. Lucius closes his eyes and replies simply, acknowledging her words and calling her mother. As he prepares to leave, he turns to the maid and asks her to look after his mother in his absence. Walking toward his future, Lucius reflects that passing at the top of his class marks a smooth beginning toward becoming valedictorian. The academy towers gleam under the sun, but elsewhere, a darker structure looms with an ominous shift, as someone reacts in surprise to what lies ahead. Fran erupts in frustration, complaining that the top student gets a dorm like a palace while she and her roommate are stuck with something closer to a stable. Her green-haired roommate calmly sips tea, telling her there's no need to make such a fuss. Fran shouts and flails behind her, warning her not to start a fire as they sit across from each other over a chessboard, her roommate focused and composed. Fran declares that the best part of this academy is that anyone can snatch the top spot at any time, punctuating her words as she knocks a chess piece down. Chess pieces fly through the air toward the lecture hall below, landing amid the rows of seated students waiting for class. Students whisper about the cursed student sitting nearby, wondering aloud what kind of cheating helped him become the top scorer, guessing it must be curse magic. Lucius sits quietly, arms crossed, unaffected by their words. One student reconsiders, wondering if he really is just an exceptionally talented person after watching him closely. A masked, pink-haired figure scoffs, insisting the display everyone admired was nothing more than a cheap trick, refusing to be impressed. A hooded figure watches Lucius from a distance through a golden archway, observing him quietly seated inside the lecture hall. The same hooded figure stands atop the rooftop of the academy, cloak billowing in the wind as they survey the grounds below. Wind sweeps across the rooftop near the flagpole, hinting that someone unseen has just moved through the area. Fran senses something and warns her hooded companion that someone is approaching, her expression sharpening with alertness. Inside the lecture hall, the masked figure begins mocking what a real sword strike would do, addressing Lucius directly mid-sentence. Another hooded figure enters, dismissing the confrontation and coldly telling the masked instructor called Gilbert to erase his pointless hostility, calling it unnecessary for the lecture. The white-haired instructor smirks, replying that he doesn't know who this new figure is and feels no obligation to listen to him. He continues, accusing the hooded newcomer of trying to intimidate him with a cheap magic trick, refusing to back down in front of the class. Fran and another student watch the exchange with amusement, joking that the man seems to have made a flashy entrance despite lacking any dignity befitting an imperial certified teacher. The hooded figure's expression darkens beneath his hood as he watches the instructor's defiance grow. He raises his hand, warning calmly that he will only repeat himself one more time before acting. With a single word, he commands the magic to erase, his fingers glowing with cold power. A massive surge of blue energy crashes through the hall, sweeping over the stunned students as the confrontation reaches its climax. Gilbert struggles against a crushing pressure bearing down on him, his eyes widening as he questions what kind of force could weigh this heavily. Fran watches beside her hooded companion, horrified, calling the man in black a monster as the pressure continues to build. Lucius observes from a distance, noting quietly to himself how easily the hooded figure handles the situation, unbothered by the display of power. The hooded man lets the energy fade from his fingers, telling Gilbert plainly that he would do well to remember this moment. Facing the class, he declares that in the academy life beginning now, certain things no longer apply. He continues, stating that bloodline and family name mean nothing here, drawing the attention of every student in the room. He finishes the thought, declaring that such things hold absolutely no meaning within these walls. His expression sharpens as his fingers curl, the weight of his words settling over the silent hall. Turning his back to the class, he states that strength is the only thing that matters in this academy. Gilbert's eyes narrow with quiet resentment, while Lucius watches on, calm and unreadable. The hooded man's gaze hardens as he tells the class it's time to begin, marking the true start of what lies ahead. In a dim, high-ceilinged lecture hall, a tall instructor introduces himself to the new class simply as Valerius, addressing the rows of first-year students seated before him. Valerius reveals his role at the academy. He is the professor responsible for teaching fundamental theory, the foundation every student must master before advancing further. Among the students, a sharp-eyed blonde boy studies the instructor closely, recognizing something familiar about him. The boy's memory sharpens. This is the same man who once appraised him years earlier, now standing before the class as a teacher rather than a stranger from his past. The boy reflects inwardly, surprised that this man now holds a teaching post at the Royal Academy. Noting the unusually strong spiritual energy radiating from someone who reports directly to the imperial court, Valerius raises his hand toward the class, signaling that orientation is about to begin, and states that he will lay out the rules governing life at the academy. He tells the students plainly that their ultimate objective during their time here is to graduate at the very top of their class. A massive glowing crystal materializes above the hall, displaying a live ranking system. Students murmur in confusion, realizing their own names are listed on it. Valerius explains that these rankings are calculated from class performance and completed missions, reflecting every student's overall activity at the academy. A name near the bottom of the list appears, Lucius Elminster, ranked 50th. Just above him sits Hector Arclight, ranked 51st, watching the board with a composed expression. Further down the list, names continue shifting in real time. A fiery-haired girl reacts with shock upon seeing an unfamiliar name, Noah Raven, appear above her own ranking. Valerius continues, explaining that reaching the top of the class specifically means placing within the top 16 of these rankings, and that those top students will go on to compete in a tournament held once every 4 years. He describes the Academy Dueling Tournament in detail. Its winner becomes the school's top student and is granted a rare coveted blessing. Panic spreads through the students as they realize they must maintain a top 16 position for 4 consecutive years without relief. Meanwhile, a nervous red-haired boy watches his own ranking climb rapidly upward on the board, numbers shifting past him. Valerius warns the class coldly that even their complaints and protests will be recorded and factored into their evaluation. He delivers the harshest rule: last once a year, the bottom 125 ranked students, without exception, will face a severe consequence. That consequence is revealed: forced expulsion from the academy entirely, regardless of circumstance. A pale-haired student in the crowd internally concludes that this brutal system is simply how the academy balances its incoming students against those who inevitably wash out. Valerius turns back to face the silent hall, asking the class directly whether they now understand the true severity of this academy. Valerius raises his hand, dark energy gathering around his fingers as he announces that the first class is about to begin. A massive surge of black spiritual power erupts from him, tearing through the sky above the students, who watch in stunned silence at the sheer scale of it. Among them, the blonde boy stares in disbelief, muttering that the man is nothing short of a monster, while a white-haired student beside him grits his teeth at the display. Valerius lands before the class in an open field, his coat settling as the storm of energy fades, the students gathered behind him in the mist. A long narrow bridge stretches out ahead of them, its surface glowing faintly green, cutting straight through the darkness toward the horizon. The students eye it warily. Valerius turns to face them, declaring that this exercise will serve as his first lesson. He tells them the task ahead is simple, as a red-haired girl and a hooded companion listen closely. He explains the rule plainly: every student must cross this bridge in full within 1 month's time. Walking onto the bridge himself, Valerius questions aloud whether that is truly all there is to it, calling the challenge nothing more than child's play. 2 students rush forward eagerly, boasting that a bridge like this poses no threat to them, pushing past their blonde classmate to go first. The red-haired girl calls out to one of them in warning, urging him to hold on before he goes any further. Ignoring her, the 2 boys sprint onto the bridge's stones, confidence written across their faces as they take their first steps. Suddenly, a violent burst of green light erupts from beneath the orange-haired boy, spiritual energy tearing out of his body uncontrollably. His companion reaches for him in panic, crying out for him to stop, but it is already too late. Valerius watches coldly, warning the remaining students that they will suffer the same fate unless they proceed with caution. The drained boy collapses, falling backward off the bridge as his friends look on in horror from a distance. The red-haired girl and her hooded companion glance toward the commotion below, asking what exactly is happening down there. The blonde boy watches Valerius walk calmly away and quietly concludes that he now understands.
He realizes the bridge itself is designed to drain spiritual energy from anyone who dares cross carelessly.
Valerius confirms it, reminding them that his lesson concerns fundamental theory, that power is the foundation of everything, and that they have 1 month to gather enough spiritual energy to survive the crossing. A brown-haired student rushes forward, calling out to stop instructor Valerius, asking nervously about the success rate of students who have taken this class before. Valerius pauses, his back turned to the group, and answers that in a typical year the success rate sits at roughly 20%. He tilts his head slightly and corrects himself, offering an apology, claiming he misspoke. He clarifies that the number he gave was not the success rate at all. The true figure is revealed instead. The 20% he quoted represents the survival rate, not the number of students who simply pass. The blonde boy turns to his classmates, visibly shaken, asking what they are supposed to do now that the stakes are clear. A brown-haired boy responds that the only path forward is to increase their spiritual energy before the deadline, while another voice wonders if that is even possible in a single month. The blonde boy narrows his eyes, rejecting that idea outright, insisting that raising spiritual energy is not the real solution. He recalls the earlier incident on the bridge, reasoning that the absorption rate of spiritual energy during the crossing holds the key to understanding the trial. He considers the bridge's sheer length, concluding that even a student with an enormous reserve of spiritual energy would still struggle to cross it entirely on raw power alone. He realizes the instructor's demand to gather more spiritual energy was never the true test. It was a deliberate misdirection. Confidence spreads across his face as he declares that he has finally figured out the real method needed to clear this lesson. Fog blankets a narrow stone bridge stretched across a deep ravine. Dark silhouettes claw their way up the cliffside while scattered black marks litter the ground below. A cold warning hangs over the scene. The survival rate for this trial stands at only 20%. A blonde young man freezes in the rain, stunned by the number. A red-haired girl behind him stumbles forward in disbelief, asking if the student who just fell is already gone. Amid the chaos, a dark-haired boy plummets alongside two others, a purple-haired girl and a silver-haired young man. He curses under his breath, refusing to accept that he might die during something framed as a school lesson. A green-haired student trembles, telling his companions he can't go through with it and that he plans to ask his mother to withdraw his enrollment. A blonde boy and a brown-haired boy stand beside him, silent. A tall instructor with a long silver braid turns his back to the group, calling the decision wise. He adds coldly that anyone whose resolve breaks at this stage would only die later out in the field anyway. The instructor raises a hand and purple energy spirals around the bridge. He gives the students a single command: 1 month to train. A countdown ignites in the sky as the trial officially begins, the students standing ready below. 20 days remain. The students sprint through the storm, dust and debris exploding behind them. The red-haired girl screams mid-motion, swinging with everything she has as a blue-haired boy shouts nearby. He warns her that what she's doing is too dangerous, but she only grows more furious. Gasping for air, she snarls that if her output isn't strong enough, she'll push past the limit anyway. Students haul massive sacks and logs across their shoulders through the mud. One of them cries out in disbelief at the weight. The red-haired girl strains beneath a boulder far larger than herself. The lesson is blunt. They must learn to carry 10 times what their bodies can currently handle. Elsewhere, a white-haired girl kneels quietly in a misty field, deciding the spot will do. A gloved hand tosses a small stone toward the bridge. The instructor watches the stone bounce and skid to a stop, explaining that contact time is the key variable. Once contact exceeds a certain threshold, a curse activates, instantly draining spiritual energy from anyone touching the stones. A pale figure with piercing red eyes reacts to the revelation, expression darkening. Engulfed in searing red light, the white-haired swordsman launches into the air, blade drawn. He tears downward through the storm, his strike ripping the mountainside apart in a single devastating arc. 3 days remain until the deadline. A blonde boy sits cross-legged in the misty forest, meditating alone while the storm rages overhead. He realizes he has found a way to clear the lesson. The real requirement was never the amount of spiritual energy at his disposal. It was the technique to manipulate it. He recalls that in his previous life, he possessed exactly that kind of control. He had mastered precision down to the cellular level, shaping energy with absolute exactness. That mastery came from repetitive training so demanding it felt like threading a needle over and over. From that discipline, he had once created a technique of his own, Phantom Shadow. He earned it the hard way, surviving the edge of death countless times in his former life. Applying that same spiritual control to magic now, he decides, is simple by comparison. Nearby, 2 classmates mock him from a distance, assuming he gave up and only got in by bribing his way through the entrance exam. A hooded figure watching from the trees dismisses him too, calling him nothing more than the cursed child of the Elminster family, certain his spoiled luck ends here. Elsewhere on the field, a green-haired girl grins as a red-haired student is sent flying by a falling tree, the timer ticking down above them. With little time left, a lone white-haired figure cuts through the storm with practiced sword strikes, refusing to waste a second. The group turns back toward the meditating blonde boy as the storm presses in around them. A red-haired student stares in disbelief, stunned that the supposed top incoming student has done nothing but sit there since day 1. The countdown falls to 2 seconds as his eyes snap open, sharp and focused. At 1 second, a faint, confident smile spreads across his face. The timer hits 0. A dark-cloaked instructor rises above the bridge in a surge of purple energy, announcing that the promised deadline has arrived. He stands alone atop the stone bridge, waiting as the storm swirls around him. He calls for the results of their month of training, demanding to know who will cross first. Panic spreads through the group as a boy is shoved forward by his friend, accused of losing the confidence he had boasted about only the day before. The white-haired student steps forward, declaring he'll be the one to cross first. The red-haired girl cuts him off, insisting she was faster and demanding to know if he's ignoring her. He backs down and agrees to let her go first, but she erupts, shouting that a decision this important should be settled with rock, paper, scissors. A red-haired girl thrust her fist into the air, declaring victory over the pale-haired boy across from her. He stood frozen, unable to accept that he had lost. The pale boy stared out at the storm-covered bridge, murmuring that he had trained so hard just for this day, yet the outcome had slipped past him anyway. Without hesitation, the red-haired girl volunteered to go next, brushing aside the boy beside her before anyone could argue. There was no need for a contest of chance when she was willing to step forward herself. Her companions grabbed her by the arms, pulling her back with laughter as she struggled against them. Behind the group, dark energy surged beneath their boots, warning that the exam had already begun to take its toll. Cries erupted as the students were struck by waves of spiritual pressure, dark tendrils lashing around them while a sickly green light pulsed nearby. High above a long stone bridge, figures plummeted through the mist toward the depths below, their bodies tumbling helplessly through the storm. A green-haired boy watched as his companion clutched at himself in pain, insisting that the spiritual energy he carried should have been more than sufficient to survive. Two students reached out toward a lone figure standing farther down the bridge, their hands stretched in desperation as a voice whispered that resistance would accomplish nothing. A tall man with silver hair braided down his back studied the scene from a distance, recognizing that the true solution to this trial had nothing to do with how much spiritual energy one possessed. He continued his assessment, noting that survival depended on outpacing the drain the bridge inflicted rather than simply enduring it. Ghostly figures illustrated his reasoning, sprinting across the bridge while continuously refining their inner energy to stay ahead of the curse consuming them. Grasping this principle was the actual key to clearing the exam. Back on the bridge, the white-haired boy asked what had gone wrong, questioning why not a single person had managed to cross yet. A dark-haired boy answered him bluntly, explaining that falling from this height meant certain death, which was reason enough for concern. The red-haired girl shouted for everyone to clear the way, shoving past her companion as she prepared to make her move. She sprinted forward across the bridge, her long red hair whipping behind her as slashes of light cut through the air around her advancing figure. Flames erupted beneath her boots, wrapping around her body as she walked steadily forward, completely unshaken by the fire enveloping her. The blaze intensified until she stood engulfed entirely, her eyes burning gold as the inferno roared around her small frame. From a distance, the braided hair man observed the explosion of fire, acknowledging that the amount of spiritual energy on display was impressive, though he clearly sensed something more was needed. The fire condensed around her as she pressed on, her steps growing heavier under the strain, yet she refused to stop moving forward. The man closed his eyes, reflecting that against a curse capable of draining every ounce of a target's spiritual energy, raw power alone would never be enough to win. Flames tore upward around the red-haired girl as she pressed forward, refusing to let the bridge's curse pull her strength away before she could cross. She exhaled sharply, warning whoever doubted her not to underestimate what she was capable of, her fire swirling tighter around her clenched fist. Determination burned in her eyes as she vowed that a bridge like this one would not be the thing to defeat her. Watching from ahead, the braided hair instructor marveled quietly at her sheer willpower, recognizing that she was forcing out spiritual energy faster than the curse could drain it. The girl surged forward again, her flames roaring around her as she closed the distance between herself and the man observing her. He remained still, his hands folded behind his back, letting her fire crash against the stone path without flinching. She let out a triumphant breath, taunting him to see how he liked her display of strength as she finally reached solid ground. The instructor's expression stayed unreadable as he simply told her she had passed, prompting her to throw her fist into the air in celebration. He turned back toward the bridge with a low grunt, watching two more students make their own attempts across the cursed stones. Studying their technique, he muttered that their method was inefficient, warning it would only slow them down when facing tougher battles ahead. His thoughts shifted toward another figure entirely, one whose approach to the exam had caught his attention from the very start. Before the bridge could begin draining a person's spiritual energy at all, he noted, there was a brief window worth exploiting. A faint delay always followed the initial contact, a gap between touch and the curse taking hold. Recognizing that opening, the white-haired boy gripped his blade tightly, deciding that if the curse needed contact to act, he would deny it the chance. He resolved not to give the bridge even that sliver of time, his sword igniting with crimson energy as he prepared to move. In a blur, he shot forward, red light tearing down the length of the bridge as the watching students gasped at his sudden burst of speed. His feet barely grazed the stones as he ran, moving with such velocity that he crossed before the curse had any chance to latch onto him. He declared that his sword was far too precious a thing to be tainted by something as trivial as this curse, slashing forward as he reached the other side. The instructor admitted he wanted to praise him as a prodigy for crossing without ever letting the bridge absorb his energy, thinking outside the boundaries the exam had set. Yet his tone turned sharp as he accused the boy of trying to kill his own instructor with that reckless dash, only for the boy to coldly deny the accusation and ask if there was something more important to discuss instead. The instructor confirmed the white-haired boy had passed, and he accepted the verdict without hesitation, as though nothing less had ever been in question. Students whispered among themselves that his movement had happened too fast to follow, calling it further proof that a prodigy stood among them. A chain rattled softly at his side as the red-haired girl fell into step beside him, watching him with a curious, sidelong glance while the storm pressed on around them. Further down the group, a blonde boy caught sight of someone stepping forward and murmured that this next contender was the academy's top student. Onlookers doubted him at first, noting that he didn't appear to carry much spiritual energy and seemed incapable of physical enhancement the way some of his peers could manage. The braided instructor watched him approach, wondering quietly what this one intended to demonstrate for him. Lightning crackled violently around the blonde boy as he stepped onto the bridge, his calm expression betraying none of the tension building beneath his feet. He walked forward steadily, each footstep echoing across the stones, and the students behind him gasped at how composed he looked while crossing. The hooded instructor studied him closely, questioning under his breath whether the boy's reputation as top student had been earned rather than given by chance. He reached the far end without faltering, his expression unreadable as the others still kneeling on the bridge looked on in disbelief. The red-haired girl dismissed him afterward, calling his performance plain and lacking any flair, while the instructor countered that it had actually been a model answer from someone who understood exactly how the bridge functioned. Turning to face the boy directly, the instructor admitted quietly that he had expected more from him, unimpressed despite the successful crossing. Nearby, a dark-haired student cried out triumphantly that he had finally succeeded, insisting this was the true result of all his training. Encouraged, another boy shouted that they could simply cross the bridge normally without needing any special trick at all. A wave of enthusiasm spread through the group as more students echoed that their hard work had paid off, celebrating their shared success. Watching them, the red-haired girl admitted in surprise that they were all more capable than she'd assumed, while the instructor scoffed, accusing them of simply gaining false confidence through numbers. His expression darkened suddenly as he turned to look behind him, sensing something was deeply wrong with what he was witnessing. A bolt of energy flashed from the blonde boy's hand, and the scene made clear this power belonged to him, the one they called Elminster. While everyone else focused on the chaos unfolding, his own spiritual refinement had been quietly working in the background the entire time. He had fed only the smallest trace of spiritual energy into the bridge, just enough to keep the curse's intricate spell circuits from ever triggering in the first place. Something the curse had held intact for 1,000 years finally broke apart, lightning tearing violently through the ancient spell binding the bridge. A cracking sound echoed across the field, catching everyone's attention as the students turned toward its source in confusion. Both the red-haired girl and the silver-haired instructor stared in disbelief, realizing he had unraveled the curse's spell formula completely. The bridge convulsed under the force of the collapse, energy exploding outward as debris scattered and the remaining students staggered back from the shockwave. Standing at the center of it all, the blonde boy held a small spark of light steady between his fingers, the calm source behind the storm he had just unleashed. The forest tore itself apart as raw energy erupted skyward, roots and stone flung into the burning air. Students stood frozen at the edge of the devastation, watching the white-haired figure at its center stand unshaken amid the chaos he had unleashed. Whispers spread through the group. One student muttered that he never expected the man to push this far, calling him nothing short of a monster. Nearby, a blonde boy kept his eyes shut, absorbing the aftermath in silence. The blonde wondered aloud whether the bridge beneath them had simply been weak from age, or if something else had caused it to give way. Another voice added that a single misstep, one moment slower, would have ended in death for all of them. Despite the fear still clinging to the group, two students broke into relieved grins. They admitted the ordeal had cut it far too close, but they had made it through. A brown-haired boy's smile faded as his thoughts shifted to the ones who hadn't been so fortunate. He noted that those who fell first had fought just as hard, giving everything they had, only to lose their footing regardless. Debris rained down from a battered stone platform where a lone figure stood, gazing over the wreckage below. A calm voice cut through the tension, telling the students not to worry, even as sharp claws flexed in the mist. Bodies drifted through the air, suspended in violet light, limp and lifeless from the trial. The white-haired man raised a hand, controlling their descent while the surviving students looked on, uncertain what to make of the scene. Shock spread across one boy's face as he demanded an explanation, insisting the fallen students should have been dead. His voice cracked with disbelief at what he was witnessing. The man with the long silver braid turned to address the crowd, declaring that every single person before him had passed. His sharp grin betrayed satisfaction hidden beneath his stern exterior. Confusion rippled through the students. Someone stammered out a question, asking whether those who fell during the exam were supposed to fail outright. The examiner explained further. Their spirit aura cultivation had indeed been measured while crossing the bridge, but that had never been the true objective. The real purpose of the trial was to test their resolve. He continued, praising them for standing firm even as death loomed close. None of them had turned and run. Instead, they had faced the danger directly. That strength of spirit, he said, would ultimately prove to be a weapon far more valuable than raw talent alone. A red-haired girl repeated the phrase under her breath, turning the idea over as if testing its weight against everything she thought she knew about power. The examiner looked toward the sky, declaring that the step each of them had taken that day held value beyond measurement. Confidence returned to the group. The red-haired girl stood tall, hands on her hips, a proud smirk spreading across her face as the tension finally broke. The white-haired man offered his final verdict, congratulating the entire group on passing the trial they had all feared would break them. Light bathed the clearing as he added that he was proud of every one of them, his words carrying across the group like a quiet reward for their courage. The red-haired girl threw her head back with a triumphant laugh, declaring the outcome had never been in doubt. As the group began walking on, a hooded figure lingered at the edge of the trees, watching closely. The blonde boy's gaze sharpened, catching the presence others had missed. The examiner's tone shifted, warning the group that passing and receiving a favorable evaluation were entirely separate matters. He announced that the rankings would follow, starting from the highest scores down to the lowest. The first name called was Lucius Elminster, placed at 45th. The blonde boy kept his arms crossed, showing no reaction as the others around him buzzed with quiet tension. A dark-haired student blurted out disbelief, recalling how effortlessly Lucius had crossed the bridge earlier. Before anyone could respond, the examiner moved straight to the next name. Murmurs spread through the crowd as students guessed who might come next, tossing out names like Hector or Lilia as likely candidates for the following rank. The examiner's gaze fell on the hooded figure standing among them, announcing that 46th place belonged to him. He revealed the name attached to the rank, Noah Raven. The hooded student lowered his hood slightly, revealing a faint, satisfied smirk beneath the fabric. A silver-haired girl narrowed her eyes, demanding to know exactly who this person was, clearly unfamiliar with the name being called. Chaos broke out as students realized the ranking placed him above Hector. Someone shouted that he was fleeing the scene entirely, and gasps followed as he darted off into the trees. The red-haired girl exploded in disbelief, unable to accept that someone so unremarkable, always hidden beneath a hood, had outranked her. She questioned aloud whether such a person had even existed among them before this moment. A booming voice answered her doubt directly. Yes, he had existed, and the proof stood right there in the clearing for everyone to see. With the shock settling, the examiner declared the evaluations complete, instructing everyone to accept their given rankings without complaint. The red-haired girl stared at her own result, 57th place, stunned that she had fallen behind someone she considered far weaker. Nearby, a green-haired girl admitted she had no chance of catching up either. Hector secured 47th, his expression tight with irritation as a classmate teased him about the state of his leg. He snapped back, telling her to stay quiet. The board confirmed the top two spots once more, Lucius in 45th, Noah trailing just behind him in 46th, cementing both as standouts among the group. Reactions rippled through the crowd. Some complained about dropping several spots, while others celebrated small gains, comparing their results with visible relief or disappointment. The blonde boy folded his arms, watching the examiner prepare to address the group again. Everyone was called to attention as new information was about to be shared. Starting the following day, students would be organized into teams of 4, marking a shift from individual evaluation to collective training. Confusion spread as students absorbed the announcement, several repeating the phrase under their breath, unsure what teamwork would mean for their future here. The examiner explained further, stating that each team would serve as the academy's core unit, operating together through every class and mission from that point forward. He added a final warning, noting that stronger teams would naturally face harder, more demanding missions than those ranked lower, setting the stakes for what awaited them all. The examiner reminded them that rankings belonged to individuals, not teams, and would keep shifting as time passed. Even those standing shoulder to shoulder as teammates remained rivals within the larger hierarchy. A brown-haired boy repeated the phrase under his breath, calling it harsh, while a nearby classmate simply agreed with a quiet nod. The examiner raised a hand toward the sky, announcing that team assignments and the first mission would both be revealed the following day. He paused before adding a critical detail. The top 4 ranked students, he explained, would be placed together as a single unit. Disbelief crossed several faces at once. Zeno's brow furrowed as he questioned why fate had paired him with this particular group. The red-haired girl snapped at him, warning him bluntly not to slow the rest of them down, while another student wondered aloud if the academy was deliberately stacking every top performer into one team. The examiner closed the briefing, telling them preparation was all that remained. One student muttered about losing a game of rock paper scissors just moments before, clearly unrelated to the seriousness of the announcement. Zeno considered the situation logically, reasoning that missions were handed out based on a team's combined strength. With this many high-ranked students grouped together, the hardest assignments seemed inevitable. Chaos broke out again as students shouted questions at each other, demanding introductions and reacting with surprise, while one figure flinched and yelped at the sudden commotion. Zeno kept his thoughts to himself, admitting internally that the arrangement was troublesome, but accepting that growing stronger required enduring the hassle. The examiner interrupted once more, revealing that the first mission for the 4 top-ranked students had already been finalized before they even knew each other's names. A sharp grin spread across the white-haired student's face as he spoke of the practical exercise planned for the next day, hinting at something far from ordinary. He issued a blunt challenge to the group, telling them their task was simple: land even a single hit on him. The following day arrived, and the red-haired girl scoffed, realizing exactly what the challenge had meant. She accused him of looking down on all of them from the start. He mocked them further, claiming even dead weight like them should manage something this easy, then offered to demonstrate exactly how it was done. Blue flames curled around his fingers as he warned them not to misunderstand his intentions, his expression calm despite the power gathering at his fingertips. The group charged forward together, energy crackling through the air, but he remained unshaken, declaring that even the top-ranked students among them stood no chance against him alone. Lightning blue flames swirled violently around his raised hand as he issued his final invitation, telling all 4 of them to come at him at once. The red-haired girl roared in fury, lunging forward with everything she had. Behind her, the hooded figure tensed, and Zeno's golden eyes narrowed, sharp and focused, as the storm of energy surrounding them all continued to build. 4 opponents surrounded the red-haired girl, closing in from every side. She cracked her knuckles and locked eyes on them, unbothered by the numbers stacked against her. Facing them down without a hint of fear, she called first hit before anyone else could move. Behind the fight, blue energy churned around a golden-eyed observer. Word spread through the crowd about his true position. He carried the title of Imperial Appraiser, ranked among the Empire's most valuable military assets. Watching from below, a student turned his gaze upward at the display of power overhead. Whispers followed him, noting how few students at the Royal Academy could ever hope to challenge him one-on-one. Static gathered along the appraiser's fingertips as he prepared his stance, murmuring a single word under his breath. Below him, the redhead launched into motion, flames trailing behind her fists as she closed the distance and clashed against him mid-air. A grin spread across another combatant's face, sparks crackling near his ear. Satisfaction colored his tone as he confirmed his current standing, eager to measure himself against the chaos unfolding. Lightning split across the battlefield in jagged streaks. Multiple fighters converged at once, each pushing their own technique forward, turning the open field into a storm of clashing forces. Behind him, another fighter braced against the pressure, sensing the incoming strike building at his back. Steel sliced through the air in a burning arc, trailing sharp light behind its edge. The swordsman pivoted mid-motion, cutting a path directly toward his target with no hesitation in his form. His expression shifted, red eyes flaring with intensity as he steadied his blade. Every muscle locked into position, preparing for the next exchange without breaking his concentration. Overhead, a fiery silhouette spun through a swirling vortex, deflecting a barrage of incoming strikes. Below, the swordsman raised his weapon high, tracking her movement through the flames. Wrapped completely in fire, the redhead descended toward the ground, one hand extended downward. Flames coiled around her entire body, feeding into the technique she prepared to unleash. Her attack detonated on impact, sending a pillar of fire and force tearing into the earth. The explosion scattered debris and light in every direction as the shockwave rippled outward. Her claws extended through the firestorm, teeth clenched as she pushed the technique to its limit. Fire wrapped tightly around her fingers, feeding directly into her next strike. A hooded figure stood with arms spread wide, channeling a separate spell from a distance. Ahead of him, another explosion lit up the trees, smoke rising from the point of impact. A magic circle spread beneath his boots, violet light climbing upward around his frame. He extended both hands forward, gathering power directly into his palms. The redhead lunged toward him mid-air, teeth bared, fist cocked back for another strike. He caught her attack head-on, sparks bursting around the point of contact. Multiple beams of light streaked past him from every angle, his coat whipping violently in the wind. He stood firm at the center of the barrage, unshaken by the incoming assault. A crimson blade curved through the air behind him, closing in fast. Without turning to look, he dismissed the attacker with a flat warning, calling them nothing more than an obstacle. A voice rang out behind the fiery fighter, catching her attention mid-charge. She turned sharply toward the sound, flames still swirling around her clenched fist. A blade descended toward the pale-haired fighter from above, catching him off guard. His eyes widened at the sudden strike, breath catching as the weapon closed in without warning. A warning rang out as the redhead dropped from above without hesitation, claws extended toward the silver-haired swordsman below. He caught the falling attack with a grin, unfazed by the sudden dive. Onlookers gasped at her recklessness, calling her a bastard for provoking someone so dangerous. Fear colored their voices as they questioned whether she was trying to get herself killed. Cold eyes studied the chaos from a distance, calculating every movement below. Blue light gathered around Zeno's raised hand as he prepared to intervene from above. Energy crackled across his fingertips, a bright core forming at the center of his palm. His expression stayed flat, entirely focused on the technique building inside his grip. Behind the braided swordsman, a beam of light tore skyward, cutting through the clouds. Steady on his feet, he watched the attack rise past him without flinching. Purple lightning exploded across the battlefield, swallowing the redhead as she launched her own assault. She pressed forward regardless, driving straight into the storm she had created. Dust settled around the swordsman as he brushed his hair back, smirking at the destruction behind him. Others lay scattered on the ground, worn down by the force of the clash. Zeno observed the wreckage in silence before speaking up. Honestly, he admitted, he would appreciate it if people showed a little more care for the Academy's property. Below him, a violent whirlwind carved through the earth, uprooting trees in its path. The figure at its center stood untouched, commanding the storm with total control. A smirk crossed the swordsman's face as he glanced toward Zeno. Golden eyes narrowed in response, sizing up the man across the field with quiet suspicion. Refusing to back down, the redhead shouted that she wasn't finished yet. The swordsman answered coldly, promising that next time he would cut her down for good. Flames and light collided in mid-air as three fighters converged at once. The cloaked figure between them moved fluidly, meeting each attack without breaking stride. A violent shockwave rippled outward, forcing the redhead and swordsman back together. Both braced themselves against the pressure radiating from their opponent ahead. Zeno's eyes widened, catching something the others had missed. Dust and debris scattered as the two fighters were sent tumbling backward across the field. Recognition crossed Zeno's face as he studied the man causing all the damage. It only looked like he was fighting all three at once, he realized. But that wasn't actually what was happening. Instead of engaging everyone simultaneously, the man handled them one at a time, moving too fast for the eye to track. First the swordsman, then the redhead, then the third opponent fell into his rhythm in sequence. Each transition between targets left a fractional gap behind him, growing slightly wider with every switch. That single opening appeared only for an instant, its location shifting unpredictably each time. Piecing the pattern together, Zeno resolved to time his strike precisely with the rhythm of the man's attacks. Determination hardened across his face as the plan took shape in his mind. A fist connected hard, drawing a pained grunt from the swordsman. Refusing to be underestimated, he snapped back at his opponents, standing firm alongside Zeno and the redhead. A faint sound of surprise escaped the cloaked man's lips as the tide shifted. Light and force surged around him, meeting the redhead's charging assault head-on as the fight pressed forward. Two flaming projectiles arced across the sky as the group closed in on their target. Zeno launched a violet beam from behind them, catching the hooded man off guard mid-stance. The strike detonated at close range, sending shockwaves rippling outward through the clearing. Both the redhead and the swordsman were forced back by the sheer force of the explosion. Blood trickled down the swordsman's cheek as debris flew past him. Below, the hooded man seized the opening, grabbing Zeno by the collar and pulling him in close. Fire coiled around the redhead's fist as she surged forward to intervene. The swordsman moved in tandem beside her, closing the distance toward the struggle ahead. Their combined assault detonated against the hooded man's guard, but he remained standing at the center of the blast. Zeno stared down at the aftermath, his expression flat and unreadable. Silence settled as the hooded figure knelt motionless, unaffected by the damage around him. Both the redhead and swordsman locked their eyes forward, bracing for what would come next. Zeno soared skyward, energy spiraling around his frame as he prepared another attack. The swordsman tracked his ascent from below, watching closely without moving. A satisfied smirk crossed Zeno's face as he confirmed the technique had landed. The attack had finally broken through, giving them the opening they needed. Blinding light erupted around Zeno as arcane symbols tore through the air, his silver-blue hair whipping in the surge of energy gathering above his head. A commander watched from the sidelines, marking the assault with cold interest as the explosion of light and blade-shaped constructs ripped through the battlefield below. The shockwave rolled outward across the sky, forcing a cloaked figure and his companions to shield themselves from the aftermath of the colossal strike. Stunned, the red-haired woman beside him could barely process what she'd witnessed, muttering in disbelief as the smoke began to clear. The hooded figure noted grimly that even an attack carrying that much destructive force hadn't managed to leave a single mark on their opponent. Pressing his fingers together in concentration, the enemy admitted that being pushed into using magic at all was in itself a rare achievement. Still, he dismissed the effort as insufficient, telling them plainly that he'd expected far more from their combined assault. His tone sharpened into a threat, warning that failure to clear the exercise within the hour would mean the disbandment of their four-man cell. He reminded them coldly that they were meant to function as a unit, urging them to consider what teamwork truly required before declaring he'd stop holding back. Undeterred, he added that they'd need a real strategy beyond simply waiting for an opening to appear. Frustration boiled over in the red-haired girl, who thrashed and shouted about how unbearably irritating their opponent was, questioning whether he was even human. Caught off guard by a sudden voice, she flinched as Zeno stepped forward, calling out to get her attention. Rounding on him, she demanded to know if he actually had some kind of plan hidden up his sleeve. Grudgingly, she admitted he was the only one who'd managed to force their enemy into using defensive magic at all, and agreed to hear him out this time. Clenching her fist, she declared she refused to accept defeat in a place like this, her resolve hardening despite the earlier humiliation. Zeno's thoughts drifted back to a moment just before, replaying the details of the exchange in his mind. He recalled the instant his magic had connected, describing how he'd spotted a faint distortion rippling through the spiritual energy of their opponent's defensive barrier. The white-haired enemy had brushed it off at the time, questioning why a mere distortion should matter at all. Zeno reasoned that the defensive spell likely worked by concentrating spiritual energy directly at the point of impact, reinforcing that single spot to withstand a strike. From that, he drew his conclusion: if multiple points were struck at once, the barrier's spiritual energy would be forced to spread thin, scattering its focus and dragging down its overall strength. The red-haired girl nodded slowly, accepting Zeno's reasoning as their opponent stood waiting in the distance, patient and unbothered. Nearby, the hooded stranger wondered aloud whether their enemy had truly read through the entire trick within a single instant of impact, calling the feat nothing short of astonishing. Flames roared upward around a clenched fist as Zeno pieced together the logic further, reasoning that if the theory held, throwing more attacks at once would only work in their favor. Turning to the silver-haired swordsman beside him, he asked flatly whether the man could keep up his end, adding pointedly that this plan wasn't being built purely out of goodwill toward him. From beneath his hood, the masked ally grinned and assured them that if sheer numbers were what the plan required, he'd handle that part without issue. The silver-braided opponent tilted his head with quiet confidence, inviting them to show him exactly how they intended to come at him. Fire, blade and light converged in an instant as all three combatants launched themselves forward together, shouting that the real clash was finally beginning. Sword strikes, flame, and a surge of blue energy collided in mid-air, the three attackers converging on their target from separate angles at once. Even as the blows rained down, their opponent remained composed, remarking that trying to overwhelm him through numbers alone wouldn't be enough given the gap in raw power between them. A massive burst of light and steel tore through the sky as their combined assault slammed into him with tremendous force, shaking the battlefield itself. Gritting his teeth against the impact, he summoned a defensive technique, forcing out the word through clenched jaw as he activated it under pressure. Flames spiraled upward in ring after ring as the red-haired mage poured more power into her assault, refusing to let the pressure ease for even a moment. The combined force of fire, steel, and light kept building, each element feeding into the other as the three fighters pressed their advantage without pause. The barrier beneath them fractured under the weight of the assault, spiderweb cracks spreading outward as the defensive shield began to give way. Despite the damage, the enemy remained calm, acknowledging that it had been their strongest strike so far, though his tone made clear it still wasn't enough. Gathering a concentrated orb of energy between his palms, he prepared his counter, remarking with quiet mockery that it was a shame things had to end this way for them. Exhaustion finally caught up with both allies, the white-haired swordsman and the red-haired mage admitting through gritted teeth that they had nothing left to give. A sudden crack split the ground beneath them as the masked figure surged forward, launching himself upward while the other two dropped low, bracing for what came next. An impact rang out loud and sudden as steel met flesh, freezing the moment as three fighters converged on their staggered opponent from every direction. Yet even battered, Zeno's expression sharpened into a fierce grin, and his voice cut through the settling dust with quiet certainty that the fight was far from finished. A guttural roar tore from the group as their combined strength surged forward, the mage and swordsman locked in the final push while their masked ally strained against the mounting pressure. Steel and flame fused into a single blazing current, the weapon cutting through resistance as golden sparks scattered into the darkness surrounding it. A brilliant beam split the sky apart, and both the silver-haired swordsman and the red-haired mage watched with wide, unblinking eyes as the light struck true. The explosion consumed the battlefield entirely, swallowing every figure in a blinding wash of blue and white as the attack reached its peak. When the glow finally settled, the four of them stood together, staring ahead through the drifting light at what remained of their opponent. They pressed forward without hesitation, sprinting across the field toward the fallen figure to confirm the outcome of the battle. A thin cut marked their target's cheek, and for the first time, he acknowledged their effort with a simple verdict: they had passed. Relief broke across the swordsman's face as he turned to his red-haired companion, declaring with a wide grin that they'd actually pulled it off. Behind them, their masked ally sighed in quiet gratitude before collapsing to the ground, his strength completely spent from the effort. Exhaustion caught up with both fighters as they dropped to their knees, gasping for breath while Zeno remained standing calmly behind them. Their opponent straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow as he remarked that they should be thankful for his power, adding with a smirk that their performance hadn't been half bad, enough that he wouldn't mind taking one of them on as an underling. The offer caught the group off guard, and before anyone could respond further, Zeno's voice cut through, warning flatly that he wouldn't repeat himself. Turning his back to the others, Zeno stood in silence, his mind replaying something unexpected that had happened during the clash, a question forming that he couldn't yet answer. In that instant during the fight, something had shifted within him, a strange resonance building between his blade and the magic coursing through his body. Sword and spell had merged into a single force, blurring the line between the two disciplines he'd spent his life mastering separately. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though the magic itself had taken the shape of a blade, sharp and focused in a way he'd never experienced before. The realization struck him fully then, that fusing swordsmanship and magic together might be possible, if he could only learn to control it. He considered the possibility further, wondering whether he could refine that momentary fusion into something solid, something he could call upon at will. Standing tall with a confident smile, Zeno flexed his fingers, sensing the shift in his own power, and recognizing that everything from this point forward would be different. After the training exercise ends, the black-robed instructor watches his exhausted students kneeling on the grass. He tells them the goal was never raw strength but teamwork, and admits that despite their inexperience, they are finally starting to understand what that means. A voice echoes in Zeno's mind, reminding him not to forget the coordination they achieved during that earlier clash. The memory of the attack lingers, sharp and unshakable. Moments before, Zeno had raised his hand as violet lightning tore through the sky above his kneeling comrades. Something unfamiliar had surged through him during that exchange. Sitting alone afterward, Zeno replays the sensation in his head. It felt like swordsmanship and magic merging into a single force, something neither discipline could achieve on its own. A sharp grin spreads across his face as the idea takes shape. If he can master whatever happened out there, it would become a devastating weapon against his enemy. Zeno makes his way into the Royal Academy's Grand Library, where a red-haired girl already sits among towering shelves and flickering chandeliers, absorbed in her own reading. He settles into a chair and opens an old volume titled Basic Spiritual Energy Theory, its pages filled with ancient script waiting to be deciphered. The text describes how spiritual energy, once transmuted, flows through circuits embedded within the body, forming the foundation of every mage and swordsman's power. That same energy branches into two forms, becoming magic power for spellcasters or battle energy for those who fight with blades, depending on which path a person walks. Most people are born carrying only one of these circuits, forced to choose between the sword and the spell, never both. Zeno pieces it together in his mind. The attack that stunned everyone earlier wasn't his alone, it came from layering his own magic over Hector's battle energy, a technique only possible when two different circuits worked in tandem. He turns the page and freezes. The book claims that in extremely rare cases, individuals are born possessing both circuits at once, and it was one such person, the Academy's legendary founder, who first fused sword and magic together. Realization hits him like a jolt. His eyes widen and a slow, knowing smile spreads across his face as the pieces finally click into place. That night, Zeno stands alone beneath the moonlight, testing the theory on his own, blue flame wrapping around his blade as he grips it with quiet resolve. The attempt collapses into failure, the energy fizzling out before it can take proper form. Yet as his sword flickers weakly, he notices something strange, a faint trace resembling the battle energy circuit he had mastered completely in his previous life as the Sword Saint. The thought strikes him with force. That circuit, perfected across a lifetime of swordsmanship, might still exist somewhere within him, dormant but not gone. If he can awaken it and learn to wield magic power in this life as well, he might reach the same fusion the founder once achieved, becoming something far beyond an ordinary swordsman or mage. The next day, Zeno soars above a sprawling forest training ground, bats scattering around him as he descends toward a formation of academy students gathered below. A loud, energetic voice booms through a megaphone as their new instructor, Miss Kathy, introduces herself with theatrical flair, leaving the students overwhelmed by her sheer enthusiasm. Miss Bun, Kathy announces through her megaphone that today's special exercise is reserved for teams ranked 30th through 100th among all 500 students in the academy, calling it a high-class inter-class match meant to test their standing. Nearby, rival students take notice of the newcomers. A pale girl with a long ponytail stares while others whisper among themselves, surprised that freshmen have actually shown up to compete. Miss Kathy soars overhead, cheering the students on and urging every team to push hard and climb the rankings. Zeno studies the opposing group with a calculating gaze, silently noting that these particular students hold a higher rank than his own team. Two of the rivals chuckle under their breath, clearly unimpressed. Their mockery draws an immediate reaction from Sylvia, whose red hair flares as she snaps at them not to dare look down on her. Sylvia squares off against the group despite being outnumbered, her temper flaring while one of the taller rivals watches with quiet menace, unshaken by her outburst. A massive figure looms behind her before she can react further, his broad shoulders blocking out the light as she turns, startled by his sheer size. The giant flinches and stammers an apology, admitting that his large frame made it hard for him to notice her standing so close. His companions rush to smooth things over, bowing and offering apologies on his behalf, while Sylvia stands frozen, stunned by just how enormous the man actually is. Miss Kathy watches from above, grinning as she predicts the match will be effortless for whichever team plays it smart. She explains the objective clearly. A spiritual orb rests hidden within a giant tree at the heart of the mangrove, and whichever team claims it first wins the exercise. Zeno repeats the term under his breath, turning the concept over in his mind as his teammates wait for further explanation. Miss Kathy elaborates further, describing the orb as a crystal formed from condensed high-purity spiritual energy, a rare academy treasure capable of dramatically boosting a student's base reserves upon absorption. Two students embrace with excitement, realizing what such a boost could mean, essentially compressing years of grueling training into a single instant. Zeno's expression shifts as the pieces align in his mind. A slow grin spreads across his face as understanding takes hold, convinced this is exactly the opportunity he has been searching for. He reasons that if he can draw in a massive surge of that high-purity spiritual energy all at once, it might be enough to awaken the dormant battle energy circuit buried within him since his previous life. Miss Moore. Kathy delivers the final rules, confirming that combat between teams is permitted without restriction and that the exercise will run until the sun sets. Tension crackles across the field as every team locks eyes on their rivals, each group bracing itself, fully aware that the fight for the orb is about to begin in earnest. Kathy launches a signal flare into the sky, its explosion marking the official start, sending every team sprinting forward at once toward the heart of the mangrove. Zeno leads his group through the dense forest at full speed, Sylvia and Hector close behind him, their footsteps pounding against the earth as they race to reach the orb before anyone else can claim it. Two enemy fighters close in fast, one wielding a spear wreathed in orange flame, the other rushing forward with a blade drawn. Zeno watches the ambush unfold from a distance, his expression calm despite the danger. The spear wielder lunges downward with brutal force, taunting the freshman with mock politeness as steel clashes against the group below, sending shockwaves through the clearing. Marcus recognizes the attackers and freezes, realizing with dread that these are the very students ranked above his own team. The orange-haired spearman and his sword-wielding partner leap through the air together, screaming for their targets to fall where they stand as they descend for the kill. A burst of lightning erupts between the combatants as Zeno intercepts the attack head-on, catching the spear's momentum and turning the tide of the clash in an instant. Both attackers crash to the ground, defeated. Sylvia and Marcus stare in stunned silence, unable to process how quickly their supposed superiors were taken down. Zeno turns away from the fallen enemies, warning his teammates not to be fooled by rankings, reminding them that what they witnessed during that earlier training exercise still holds true. His golden eyes remain fixed and steady as he states plainly that their team possesses real strength, regardless of where the rankings place them. From behind, a mocking voice cuts through the moment, demanding to know exactly who Sylvia thinks she was calling strong just now. A new opponent steps forward with a sly grin, informing them that the actual fight is only just beginning, dismissing everything that came before as nothing more than a warm-up. Marcus repeats the words under his breath, his sharp eyes narrowing as he processes the threat now standing before them. Chaos erupts as green lightning surges through the battlefield, another swordsman clashing violently against a rifle-wielding opponent, sparks tearing through the air between them. The green-eyed attacker roars with excitement, declaring that this rookie hunt will be more than enough to seize every ranking point his team desires. Marcus grits his teeth as the enemy's energy surges around him, the green current crackling violently while a red-haired figure charges forward through the storm of light. Both fighters bare their teeth mid-clash, neither willing to yield an inch as their auras collide in a blinding wave of green. From above, a voice cries out for Sylvia not to lose herself in the moment, watching as she stands alone against two towering opponents closing in from both sides. Sylvia grits her teeth and steadies herself, flames erupting around her fists as she prepares to face the danger without backing down. She unleashes a fierce counterattack, fire wrapping around her arm as she strikes upward against the two enemies descending toward her. The impact detonates in a blinding explosion, her flaming fist meeting a descending blade in a violent collision that shakes the surrounding forest. Sylvia clicks her tongue in irritation, flames still dancing around her as she glares at her opponent, while across the battlefield another enemy watches the exchange with narrowed, calculating eyes. Sylvia's fist erupts with flame as she drives it forward, screaming a warning that no one should ever look down on her team, the impact tearing through the ground beneath her opponents. She stands amid the burning wreckage, eyes sharp and unwavering, refusing to back down even as sparks scatter around her defiant frame. Deep in the trees, a cloaked figure raises a magic circle, jagged ice crystals bursting outward as an enraged voice curses the young fighters challenging him. Zeno cuts through the barrage without hesitation, declaring that their team is strong as he clashes against the ice storm, deflecting shards with practiced precision. From within the smoke, someone notices the wording of that declaration, quietly reflecting on the fact that Zeno had said "we" instead of speaking only for himself. More crystalline blades rain down around Marcus and Sylvia, the hooded mage snarling that his warning extends to every last one of them, sparing no one. Ice shatters violently across the battlefield as the enemy channels everything he has, desperate to overwhelm the freshmen before they can close the distance. With a fierce battle cry, Marcus lands a devastating blow that sends his last opponent crashing to the ground, dust and debris scattering across the clearing. Sylvia grins at Marcus, impressed that he can actually fight, while he stares down at the defeated enemy, still processing that they genuinely won. Zeno steps toward the fallen fighter and asks quietly if the battle has finally reached its end, calm despite the chaos that surrounded them moments earlier. Surrounded by unconscious opponents scattered across the forest floor, Zeno tells his teammates it's time to move, already turning to continue their advance. Elsewhere, Ms. Kathy watches the unfolding events through her floating orb, informing the audience that the top 5 ranked teams were eliminated within mere minutes of the match beginning. She adds, almost in disbelief, that the ones responsible for that upset were nothing more than a group of freshmen no one expected to matter. Watching the trio's ferocity replay before her, she admits it's impressive, though she can't ignore how dangerously strong all 3 of them clearly are. Her gaze shifts towards Zeno specifically, murmuring under her breath as she studies him, sensing something unusual about the quiet blonde boy leading the charge. She notes that with just a single word, he managed to lift the morale of his entire team, and that his own strength alone was enough to crush upperclassmen without help. As the 3 of them press forward together, she stares into the orb and asks aloud just who in the world this boy truly is, watching as the name Lucius Elminster appears beneath his determined expression. Zeno's group sprinted through the forest, one companion calling out that their destination lay just ahead while another warned everyone to stay sharp since a rival team pressed close behind. A blinding flare erupted from a massive tree up ahead, its light splitting the sky as the 3 students slowed their pace to take in the strange glow. The radiant tree pulsed brighter, forcing the group to shield their eyes even as they pushed forward without breaking stride. A sharp, unnatural sound cut through the air moments before a lone figure barked out a command for everyone to stop in their tracks. The red-haired girl snapped back in protest, insisting that hesitation would let their competitors reach the tree first, but Zeno cut her off, urging her to simply listen. Her expression shifted from anger to sly amusement as she turned her attention toward the glowing tree looming over the tree line. The white-haired instructor's calm cracked into visible alarm, his sweat betraying unease as a cloaked figure lunged from the shadows behind the group. A colossal winged silhouette tore through the sky above the tree, its presence dwarfing the students gathered below and signaling that something far beyond an ordinary exam had begun. Panic spread among the scattered examinees as another instructor shouted in shock, while Zeno's team pressed on, undeterred by the chaos erupting around them. A translucent barrier rippled open, revealing rows of jagged teeth within, and a voice cried out for Instructor Kathy as the threat made itself known. A stunned examiner demanded answers, insisting the exam be halted immediately and reinforcements called in to deal with whatever had just appeared. Kathy dismissed the request outright, brushing off the danger with a playful hum and declaring that the exam would continue exactly as planned. Her footsteps landed lightly on the ground as she remarked that unexpected complications like this were nothing out of the ordinary. The furious examiner accused her of recklessness, but Kathy simply looked away, murmuring that anyone unable to survive here didn't deserve to continue. She added coolly that such a student would never have lasted on an actual battlefield anyway, her tone unbothered by the stakes involved. The examiner pressed his objection further, only for Kathy to wave it off with a teasing laugh, admitting she'd only been joking about the harsher part. She reassured the group that if circumstances truly spiraled out of control, they could count on her, the self-proclaimed queen bee, to step in and handle it. With the immediate danger behind them, Zeno exhaled in relief, though a nagging thought lingered that no magical beasts should have existed in this particular region. Kathy's expression darkened subtly, her sharpened gaze betraying a private suspicion that something about the situation felt deeply wrong. Chaos erupted without warning as a violent surge of energy tore through the battlefield, swords clashing against monstrous force while the group scrambled to react to the sudden explosion of combat around them. A dark-haired swordsman leapt through the storm, blade raised high, while his red-haired companion followed close behind as a golden weapon streaked toward a green-haired opponent below. Lightning tore across the sky as the scaled beast absorbed the impact without flinching, its hide glowing with an eerie blue light that left the attacker stunned. One of the hooded figures unleashed a burst of energy skyward, while another combatant crashed through the underbrush, pink flames trailing behind her landing. A violent explosion of light and force ripped through the battlefield, scattering debris and energy in every direction as the collision reached its peak. The brown-haired student grinned through the chaos, confident in his position, while below the water's surface a massive purple-scaled creature stirred with a single crimson eye locked open. The dark-haired fighter smirked, disbelief evident in his voice as he realized his strike had failed to leave even a mark on their target. The beast's tail slammed back into the water, sending a wave crashing outward as two panicked voices argued over what to do next. Countless purple spikes rained down from above as the monster's jaws opened wide, and terrified cries rang out warning that it intended to devour them all. Zeno shot downward through the storm, his group scattered behind him, moving with sharp purpose toward the erupting battle beneath the clouds. A green-haired examinee stared in disbelief, questioning aloud whether the reckless figure charging forward had lost all sense of self-preservation. The creature's massive jaw loomed impossibly large against the moonlit water, its crimson eye fixed on the tiny figure descending toward it. The red-haired girl screamed out a name in fury, calling her companion an absolute idiot for rushing headlong into danger. Zeno plummeted straight toward the beast's open mouth while two others watched from below, their fists clenched in helpless tension. A surge of dark energy gathered and twisted violently in the storm, blades of light slicing through the rain as the confrontation reached its climax. The two women braced themselves as the creature's tail burst upward from the water once more, spraying mist and droplets across the shoreline. A bespectacled student clenched his jaw, muttering that this was exactly why he despised inexperienced freshmen who charged into battle without any real combat experience. A brilliant flash split the darkness as the red-haired girl gasped, urging the others to look up at whatever had just happened above them. The enormous beast rocketed skyward, torn apart in mid-air as golden fragments scattered around its ascending body beneath the pale moon. A calm voice noted that anything of such massive size crashing back down from that height would trigger a tsunami capable of swallowing the entire area. The creature's head snapped upward one final time, its red eye blazing before the beast let out a deafening roar that echoed across the storm-torn water. A blinding explosion tore through the sky above the group, purple shards scattering outward as everyone froze, watching the aftermath of the massive detonation. Shock spread across every face as the students stared upward, none of them able to process what had just unfolded before their eyes. A lone figure hovered within the glowing core of light, suspended at the center of the blast while the rest of the group looked on from below in stunned silence. One student stammered in disbelief, questioning whether that same figure had single-handedly torn the creature apart from within. Zeno held a glowing green orb in his palm, calm and unshaken by what he had just accomplished, before confirming simply that he'd gotten what he needed. A tall figure landed softly on the grassy hill as onlookers gathered below, their eyes fixed upward. Among the crowd, a red-haired woman and a silver-haired man stood apart from the rest, watching the descent with quiet interest. The white-haired instructor drifted down through the shimmering barrier, her posture relaxed despite the height. She called out cheerfully, announcing that the special exercise had reached its end. Raising a megaphone to her lips, she ordered every student scattered across the field to head back toward the school building. Golden eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction as a memory surfaced. Zeno standing before his teammates, a glowing green orb cradled in his palm, the object drawing every gaze around him. Nearby, a masked upperclassman scowled, unable to hide his frustration. A group of first years had claimed victory that should have belonged to his team. Zeno's group crossed the misty field together, their steps unhurried. Behind them, the red-haired girl bragged that the fight had been nothing more than a breeze, while the silver-haired boy walked in silence beside her. The masked figure let out a low chuckle before falling quiet again. Setting the comment aside, the red-haired girl's expression sharpened, her thoughts clearly drifting elsewhere. All attention shifted toward Zeno, who stood at the center of the group bathed in green light. A single word left someone's mouth, carrying both suspicion and disbelief. Staring at his back, the girl's mind raced with the same unanswered question: who exactly was this boy, and how had he grown so powerful so quickly? Zeno studied the orb resting in his hands, its glow casting sharp shadows across his face. Quietly, he identified it as a spiritual energy orb, something far beyond an ordinary find. Energy pulsed from the sphere in visible waves. He noted the density radiating from within it, sensing a force far stronger than anything he had encountered before. A dangerous smile crept across his lips. With this kind of power in hand, he realized his dormant fighting spirit circuit might finally have a chance to awaken. Footsteps echoed through the clearing as the group pressed forward, the masked figure trailing slightly behind the others. One of the older students turned to face them, admitting with clear astonishment that their strength had far exceeded expectations. He confessed that fear alone had frozen his entire team in place, adding that the elderly man who had bumped into them earlier that morning turned out to be far more dangerous than anyone assumed. Still catching his breath, the man admitted he and his teammates had been utterly stunned. Their performance felt impossible to believe coming from first-year students. He praised the silver-haired boy directly, calling his strength incredible, then extended the compliment to the rest of the group, noting how their spiritual energy had left a lasting impression. Grinning, the older student admitted their own strength paled in comparison, but years of experience at the academy meant they could still prove useful. He offered a handshake, suggesting they start off as friends. The red-haired girl eyed the outstretched hand with visible hesitation, her expression unreadable. After a brief pause, she sighed and admitted there was no avoiding it now, a sly grin spreading across her face. Her gloved hand finally met his in a firm shake, sealing the moment between them. Off to the side, the silver-haired man watched quietly, a faint smile crossing his face as the tension eased. A sudden strike cracked through the clearing as a fierce blow connected, sending shockwaves rippling outward. The red-haired girl's fist collided with unexpected force, catching her opponent off guard. Her eyes blazed with fury as she snarled through the impact, blood splattering from the collision. A massive explosion of light and debris erupted around them, throwing figures backward through the chaos. Watching from a distance, the silver-haired man and the hooded figure observed the destruction unfold. Meanwhile, the girl let out an anguished cry, her face twisted in pain as smoke swirled around her. Collapsed together amid the drifting haze, Zeno and the girl lay tangled on the ground. A voice cut through the stillness, demanding to know exactly what scheme was being plotted against them. Zeno rose first, his expression cold as he informed her flatly that the exercise had already ended. The girl remained slumped beside him, still recovering from the exchange. Elsewhere, the group of older men pressed forward through the trees, their leader letting out a low, appreciative remark. He called the performance magnificent, admiration clear on his weathered face. His praise continued, insisting that what they witnessed truly deserved to be called magnificent. Something behind his gleaming eyes suggested far more than simple admiration. Turning to face his companions, the ponytailed man reached out with an unsettling grin, declaring that they made the perfect bait for whatever plan he had in mind. The hooded figure tensed, sensing danger radiating from the old man's sudden shift in tone. Grinning wider, the man posed a strange question, asking if the children knew what a swamp dweller truly was. Confusion spread among the group as the hooded one repeated the unfamiliar term back, uncertain what it could mean or why it mattered now. The old man explained the academy's single unforgiving rule. Every year, the bottom 125 students in the rankings faced mandatory expulsion, nothing more, nothing less. He continued, calling the system cruel, describing those trapped between two extremes, never climbing high enough to earn a blessing, yet never falling far enough to be cast out either. Faded silhouettes climbed an endless staircase in his memory, illustrating existences bound to the academy for years, aging quietly while progress remained forever out of reach. Eyes glowing an eerie red, The old man declared that within these walls, people like them carried a bitter nickname. They were known simply as swamp dwellers. Zeno's gaze sharpened as he studied the men ahead, quietly wondering what exactly these self-proclaimed swamp dwellers were planning to accomplish. The bald man beside their leader admitted they had lingered in this place for far too long, peaking as mid-tier students before age quietly caught up with them all. Bitterness crept into the leader's voice as he revealed they no longer held the right to even speak their own family names, stripped of every honor they once carried. From the shadows, the silver-haired man mocked the confession, asking coldly if their loyalty to this place was nothing more than a desperate obsession clung to by washed-up has-beens. Rage exploded across the old man's face as he screamed his defiance, insisting they had lost everything and few paths remained for old men desperate to reclaim the top. Trembling with fury, he finally revealed their true purpose, vowing that until a blessing was seized and everything stolen from them was reclaimed, they would stop at nothing to achieve it. Purple energy surged violently as the old man declared they no longer cared what methods it took to succeed. An enormous hourglass materialized before them, its glowing sand crackling with sinister power. Shock crossed the silver-haired man's face as he stared at the object, questioning aloud what exactly it could be. He wondered if it was some kind of corpse, unable to hide his unease. A pile of skulls glowed faintly beneath the surface, a skeletal hand reaching upward through the debris. Nearby, a pair of predatory yellow eyes narrowed, watching the scene with cold calculation. A hooded figure spun through the air, dark tendrils whipping around a glowing magic circle beneath their feet. The atmosphere thickened with violent purple energy as the spell took shape. The figure descended into a swirling void, while a blade-wielding opponent charged from below. The bald man watched from a distance, sweat dripping as the confrontation intensified overhead. A wide, unsettling grin spread across the old man's face. Below, the two men raised their arms triumphantly, celebrating as dark energy erupted around the towering hourglass. Both men extended their hands upward, drawing whirling strands of purple magic directly into the artifact. The swirling vortex pulsed brighter with every passing second. The bald man's mouth opened wide as he gulped down streams of shimmering energy, his expression twisting with pleasure. Light burst from deep within his throat as the power surged through him. Ecstatic screams filled the air as the hourglass shattered with brilliant light. Both men threw their heads back, overwhelmed by how incredible the sensation felt coursing through their bodies. Grinning wickedly, the balding man extended his hand toward Zeno, taunting him with a chilling invitation to be drained completely until nothing remained. Zeno recoiled instinctively, shouting for the man to stay away as dark tendrils lashed dangerously close, threatening to consume him the same way. Overwhelmed with gratitude, the bald man wept and laughed simultaneously, thanking the artifact repeatedly as waves of stolen energy coursed violently through his body. The silver-haired man's eyes burned with recognition as he identified the glowing bottle, realizing exactly what dangerous object they were dealing with. Without hesitation, he lunged forward with his blade drawn, aiming straight for the heart of the shattered artifact suspended above the two men. His sword sliced cleanly through the air, crimson light trailing behind the blade as it tore through the swirling storm of magic surrounding the hourglass. Fury contorted his face as he screamed in surprise, his attack apparently failing to achieve what he intended against the strange device. Seizing the opportunity, the old man wrapped his arms tightly around him from behind, smirking as he muttered that things had just gotten unfortunate for his target. Struggling against the hold, he heard the man explain coldly that the bottle could only be touched safely by those who had cast the original spell. Zeno's eyes sharpened with realization as he watched the bald man laughing manically, understanding now that the artifact absorbed every magical attack thrown against it. The old man tightened his grip further, revealing with a wicked smile that physical contact alone was enough to drain a person's energy completely, leaving his captive utterly defenseless. A cold resolve settled across his features as he murmured that in that case, things would proceed differently now. Wind whipped through his pale hair while he prepared to act. The bald man surged forward through the air, dragging both captives with him, purple energy trailing violently behind. Below, a sudden kick connected with brutal force, sending shockwaves through the impact zone. A massive burst of blue light exploded across the battlefield as the two men collided mid-strike. Zeno pushed through the chaos, his blade cutting a path directly toward his target. Debris scattered through the air as the explosion sent the silver-haired man crashing to the ground, breathless and strained. Zeno landed nearby, noting calmly that physical attacks still seemed to work against their enemy. Smoke swallowed the clearing as the old man staggered backward, gasping for breath. Kneeling weakly on the grass, he found himself trapped beneath the shadow of an approaching blade. Struggling to rise, the old man demanded to know what exactly his opponent intended to do, pointing out that he was dealing with an actual magic caster. Gripping his sword tightly, Zeno corrected him without hesitation, stating flatly that the assumption wasn't quite right. Lifting his blade higher, he admitted quietly that his origins were something entirely different from what the man expected. Crimson light gleamed faintly in the darkness as he revealed the truth, declaring that his true specialization lay in swordsmanship rather than magic. A sharp grin spread across his face, one eye glowing crimson red as he tightened his grip on the blade, ready to finish what he started. In a shadowed clearing, a lean gray-clad swordsman raised a brow at the boy standing before him, unable to hide his amusement at the idea of a mage wielding a blade. Beside him, a stout man in black burst into laughter, certain the challenge in front of them was nothing more than a joke. The stout man's grin widened as he repeated the absurdity out loud, mocking the notion that a child born into a magic bloodline would dare pick up a sword instead of relying on spells. Confident in his strength, he lunged forward through the rain, boasting that he would cut down the so-called amateur swordsman in an instant. His blade met resistance the moment it closed in. Zeno's counter came fast, a burst of light meeting steel, and the attacker's confidence cracked into a startled cry as the exchange knocked him off balance. The gray-clad swordsman lunged in to finish what his ally started, but Zeno's blade found him first, drawing blood and forcing a pained grunt from his throat. Gritted teeth and wide eyes betrayed the swordsman's disbelief as he struggled to hold his stance. Across from him, Zeno's golden gaze remained calm, sharp and unreadable. His grip tightened around the hilt, knuckles pale beneath his glove, while his eyes narrowed with focus, reading every twitch of his opponents before committing to the next strike. The blade cut through the rain in a single decisive arc, light trailing behind steel as it tore through his target, scattering blood into the storm. From a distance, a red-haired woman watched the scene unfold, her expression frozen in disbelief. She murmured that what she had just witnessed should not have been possible. Zeno stood over his fallen opponent, sword lowered at his side, rain streaming down his coat as silence settled over the battlefield. Nearby, a silver-haired man with crimson eyes stared at the outcome, his mind racing to make sense of it. No trace of magical power or fighting spirit had touched that swordsmanship, and yet the results spoke for themselves. His eye widened further, demanding an answer neither he nor anyone present could offer, how a boy could have accomplished something that broke every rule he understood. The bald man was sent tumbling through the air, a startled shriek tearing from him as he crashed backward, completely unprepared for the force behind the blow. Sprawled atop a floating platform, he shouted his disbelief, insisting Zeno was nothing more than a mage-born child. Voices around him urged calm, reminding him the boy had no fighting spirit to speak of, only 12 years of supposed helplessness. Steadying his breathing, the bald man repeated the words to himself, trying to convince his racing heart that composure was still within reach. A pink glow gathered in his outstretched palm, energy swirling to life. Zeno watched from a distance, wary, reading the shift in the air around his opponent. Power surged outward violently as the man demanded submission, his voice cutting through the storm as his spell tore into the ground. Purple light swallowed the battlefield. Undeterred, Zeno pressed forward through the chaos, declaring that this next strike would be the one to end it. A massive muscular figure intercepted the blade with his bare arm, grinning as he claimed an ordinary boy without Reiki stood no chance of piercing him. Hovering above the wreckage, the transformed man revealed the truth behind his sudden strength, boasting that the power coursing through him had been stolen. Below him, Zeno steadied his stance, sword ready, unwilling to back down from what stood ahead. The bald man charged forward at full speed, warning Zeno to brace himself as he closed the distance in an instant. Zeno met the challenge head-on, sword already in motion. A brutal collision of fists and steel erupted between them, shockwaves rippling outward as both fighters refused to yield ground. A heavy punch grazed past Zeno's guard, forcing him to twist his body away. The two clashed again immediately after, light and shadow tearing through the space around them. Zeno's expression hardened as he judged the exchange, muttering that the attack still fell short of what he expected from an opponent claiming such strength. A kick caught the bald man's side, staggering him briefly before he retaliated, launching Zeno backward with sheer brute force. Struggling to keep his footing, Zeno admitted to himself that his current power still wasn't enough to close the gap between them. Steel met steel in a violent burst of sparks as Zeno considered his own limitations, recalling how his body once crumbled instantly without fighting spirit behind it. Yet this new body responded differently, even without that same power. Frustration cracked across the bald man's face as he roared that he'd had enough, accusing Zeno of testing his patience with every clash. A powerful strike sent Zeno crashing through the air, his body skidding across the ground as the red-haired woman and her hooded companion looked on in alarm. Pushing himself back onto his feet, Zeno steadied his breathing while the bald man admitted, almost mockingly, that his swordsmanship had genuinely caught him off guard. Towering over him with a wide grin, the bald man dismissed Zeno as nothing more than a child, insisting that swordsmanship without fighting spirit was as harmless as an infant's swing. A drop of green liquid fell from Zeno's hand, catching his attention. A strange sensation stirred within him, one he hadn't felt in a long time. Recognition flickered across his face as he realized what it meant, sensing that the fighting spirit from his previous life seemed to be responding once again. Green light gathered around his outstretched palm as he considered the possibility before him, weighing what would happen if he actually used this power. The bald man roared in triumph, believing the fight was already over as dark tendrils lashed toward Zeno through the storm. Holding the glowing orb steady in his hand, Zeno turned the same question over in his mind, wondering what would happen the moment he called on it again. His eyes closed briefly as the energy pulsed brighter, swirling faster within his grip, building toward something far greater than before. Green light exploded outward violently, wrapping around his entire body as the surge of power roared to life, resonating with a force that shook the air itself. Wind and light spiraled around him in a blinding vortex, his form nearly swallowed by the sheer intensity radiating from his chest. Standing amid the dying glow, Zeno lifted his gaze calmly, the storm of energy settling around him as his fighting spirit finally answered his call. Green energy pulsed violently around him, gathering into a blinding core as the power surged to its peak, ready to erupt at any moment. Zeno's eyes blazed a fierce gold, his expression twisting into a sharp grin as he acknowledged the change taking hold. His old self had finally awakened. Behind him, the ghostly outline of his former warrior form loomed, a reminder that the fighting spirit sealed within this new body belonged to the sword saint he once was. Sweat rolled down the bald man's face as he realized what he was witnessing, muttering that this circuit had been forced open using the power of a Reiki orb. Gripping his blade tightly, Zeno acknowledged the risk in his own mind, aware that his borrowed fighting spirit might only hold long enough for a single strike. Panic crept into the bald man's expression as sweat dripped from his brow, his voice cracking as he demanded to know what was happening. A wall of crimson energy exploded around Zeno, the sheer pressure of it tearing through the surroundings as he declared that this next attack would bring the fight to its end. His stance shifted low as red light wrapped around his blade, a dark silhouette watching from the shadows, tension building with every passing second. A confident smile spread across Zeno's face as golden eyes locked onto his target, admitting that this kind of overwhelming power was exactly the style he favored most. The bald man's eyes went wide with shock as he was struck, his voice breaking into a cry that this development spelled disaster for him. Sparks and light collided violently across the battlefield, the impact so severe it sent him staggering backward, gasping for breath under the weight of the attack. Blade raised high, Zeno cut through crackling red lightning, his coat whipping violently as he pressed the assault forward without hesitation. The final strike tore through the storm with a deafening roar, leaving the bald man collapsed and motionless on the ground as the dust began to settle. Kneeling amid the aftermath, Zeno caught his breath, admitting quietly that the power he'd absorbed from the Reiki orb was already starting to fade, capable of sustaining only that single decisive blow. Even so, something had changed permanently within him, the circuit inside his body now fully opened despite the borrowed strength running out. Studying his own trembling hand around the hilt, he noted that although it remained imperfect, and though he still couldn't summon fighting spirit without a Reiki orb, something had shifted. A faint smile crossed his lips as he knelt there, declaring to himself that he had finally made a real breakthrough. A hooded figure rushed toward him through the trees, and Zeno called out in surprise, recognizing the person immediately as Lucius. The red-haired woman approached cautiously, her voice edged with confusion as she asked what exactly she had just witnessed unfold before her. Lucius asked quietly if he was all right, concern evident despite the calm in his tone. Zeno answered simply, assuring him that he was fine. The silver-haired man spoke a single name, Elminster, as Zeno stood before him with the hooded figure watching close behind. Studying his stance, Elminster remarked that Zeno's swordsmanship carried the weight of decades, the kind only built through years of relentless practice. Red eyes narrowing under the moonlight, Elminster demanded to know who had trained him, raising his blade as the night around them fell tense and silent. 4 figures crossed a moonlit courtyard within the academy's outer walls. One of them broke the silence, noting that despite everything, their group's overall ranking kept climbing with each trial they cleared. The hooded member of the group confirmed it with a single word. Behind him, a fiery-haired woman added that every one of them had walked away with a Reiki orb from the encounter. Lilia Magnard, ranked 26th, lifted her chin with a sly grin. She warned the hooded figure beside her that she had no intention of losing to him again, not after tonight. Noah Raven, ranked 29th, barely reacted beneath his hood. His answer came flat and indifferent, leaving the challenge to hang unanswered in the cold hallway air. Hector Gilbert, ranked 25th, said nothing at all. His crimson eyes narrowed as he watched the others, his silence heavier than any retort could have been. Tension flickered across someone's face as a sharp gaze locked onto the group. Moments later, Lilia reached out and pulled the blonde young man closer, her grip firm and possessive. The blonde man, Zeno, ranked 19th, stood bathed in pale light. He recalled how, during a grueling training session, his fighting spirit circuit had finally torn open. Memory surged around him as lightning red energy exploded from his blade mid-swing. Even with that awakening, he understood his current Reiki reserves still couldn't sustain the circuit at will. Snow drifted past as his golden eyes darkened with focus. He acknowledged that his Reiki capacity had grown by leaps since that battle, far beyond what it once was. The group walked together through a grand hall lined with pillars, murmurs rising around them. Ahead, an ornate golden notice shimmered into view, drawing every eye in the corridor. Zeno halted before the glowing proclamation, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Lilia's scowl deepened while the hooded figure lingered quietly in the shadows. Reading the announcement, Zeno muttered the words aloud to himself, questioning what an imperial gambling coliseum could possibly mean for them. A pale hand reached toward his cheek from above, delicate fingers brushing close as a cheerful voice chimed in agreement with unsettling enthusiasm. Dangling upside down, a maid-uniformed girl swung into view with a mischievous grin, asking whether the group had suddenly grown curious about the coliseum. Still hanging there, she teased Izino about his stern expression before praising the group, claiming their recent training had let them dispose of a troublesome old rival with ease. Izino's stare hardened as he cut through her playful tone, demanding to know exactly what she wanted from them. With a sudden burst of motion, she was sent flying backward across the courtyard, laughing as she called out that he was clearly dying of curiosity. The golden notice reappeared, larger now, framed beside her airborne figure. It declared the tournament an official event hosted by the Empire itself, gathering elite fighters from every corner of the realm, not just the academy. Elsewhere, a green-haired student folded his arms, skepticism written across his face. His purple-haired companion pointed out that this was supposedly nothing more than a side spectacle where wealthy nobles wagered on the combatants. Nearby, a red-haired student's brow furrowed as he glanced toward another companion. He recalled unsettling rumors circulating about the tournament, whispers claiming that every participant who entered never made it out alive. Falling through open sky, the girl admitted that most of the rumors circulating about the tournament turned out to be true. Yet she paused before adding that one crucial detail remained unspoken. A pale-haired girl grinned as she pointed upward, explaining that the tournament stage itself had been built with a special structure unlike any ordinary arena. Every drop of Reiki released by the fighters during their matches would gather and accumulate directly within the stage itself, feeding into its core. Anyone who remained standing on that stage would inevitably absorb whatever Reiki had built up there, regardless of whether they were the one who released it. As more battles unfolded, the concentration of Reiki saturating the stage would only continue to rise, growing denser with every victory declared. The longer a fighter stayed on that platform, the girl explained, the more their own Reiki capacity would expand as a direct result. Zeno's eyes sharpened with sudden interest while Lilia looked on, confused. The girl clarified that rankings wouldn't be affected at all, since the event took place outside the academy, making it ideal for anyone eager to test their true strength. Lilia questioned why she'd bother joining something that didn't even affect her ranking, admitting she'd also face serious trouble if her parents found out she'd been gambling. Still, she agreed to go, remarking that the tournament seemed strangely unpopular for something this significant. Watching the exchange, Hector muttered under his breath about a stage that accumulated Reiki, warning that joining without any ranking benefit would only risk injury for nothing. Zeno's expression sharpened as a new thought took hold. Winning every single match would mean absorbing an enormous amount of Reiki, far more than any ordinary training could provide. Calling out to catch her attention, Zeno approached the pale-haired girl, who spun around with a bright grin the moment she noticed him. He asked directly where the registration forms could be submitted. Lilia's jaw dropped in disbelief as she demanded to know if he actually intended to participate, especially since it wouldn't help his ranking whatsoever. Before anyone could stop her, she launched herself through the air, declaring that if it was only for Lucy's benefit, she'd collect the forms herself. The pale-haired girl, addressed as Lucy, exchanged a glance with Zeno while Lilia fumed in the background, muttering something under her breath with visible irritation. Lucy leaned in close, revealing that students ranked 4th, 10th, and 15th all held positions higher than Zeno's, and that she herself intended to enter the tournament as well. Grinning back at Lilia and Zeno from a distance, she called out encouragement, telling them both to give it everything they had. Inside a grand octagonal arena, a booming voice welcomed the gathered crowd, announcing the opening of the Imperial Gambling Coliseum. A flamboyant announcer in purple strutted across the stage, explaining that the rules were simple: Spectators could bet as much as they wished on their favorite fighters, earning payouts based on the odds if their pick won. He continued, noting that the further a fighter advanced, the lower their odds would drop. In the early rounds, before anyone had drawn attention, the real opportunity was waiting. Throwing his arms wide with wild excitement, he declared it the perfect chance to uncover a dark horse, insisting the eventual champion would be whoever mastered the art of speculative investment. In the noble stands above the arena, a dark-haired man mentioned hearing rumors of a 12-year-old child representing the academy. His companion added that the whole affair was merely a sideshow for aristocrats, hardly worth wagering on. Zeno stood alone in a grand hallway lined with glowing banners, watching contestants pass by. He noted to himself that a tournament hosted by the Empire itself was clearly no small affair, judging by the sheer amount of Reiki radiating from everyone present. Fighters wrapped in colored flames moved past him through the corridor. Observing the thinning crowd, Zeno guessed that those ranked 15th and above likely hadn't arrived yet. The announcer burst onto the stage with theatrical flair, calling for everyone's attention as he prepared to reveal the matchups for the opening round. Two portraits flared to life above the stage, locked in a glowing versus screen. On one side stood a wild-haired brawler. On the other, Zeno's own composed image. The announcer gawked at the stark difference in build between the two fighters before declaring the first match, introducing the Academy's newest representative as its chosen contender. He announced that Zeno's opponent would be the hand-picked candidate from the Northern Territories Guard, a fighter known as Gardus. Up in the stands, a red-haired girl leaned forward in alarm, exclaiming that the guards from the northern region were supposedly the Empire's most elite protective unit. A pale, red-eyed young man beside her remarked dryly that she certainly knew a great deal, prompting a curt confirmation from her in response. Elsewhere in the crowd, a noblewoman cheered that a quick and decisive win would let them recover their investment fast. Gold coins rained down across the announcer's display as he threw his hands up, declaring that the match was about to begin at last. The muscular fighter opposite Zeno roared with laughter, insisting this couldn't even be called a real gamble. Another voice in the crowd urged caution, reminding everyone that the boy was still just a child and shouldn't be pushed too hard. Above the stage, the announcer explained that each player's Reiki would be channeled into their designated pillar, and once it reached full capacity, the match would officially begin. Hoisting his massive axe onto his shoulder, the towering fighter grinned and demanded to know if both combatants were ready. Zeno, standing calm and composed nearby, said nothing. The announcer swung his microphone high, shouting that everything was set and the moment had finally arrived. Flames of energy erupted along both pillars as he screamed for the match to start, slamming his hand down against the podium in excitement. In a burst of speed, Zeno's opponent lunged forward with startling force, closing the distance in an instant and sneering as he called him nothing more than a child. Watching from above, the red-haired girl gasped at the sheer speed of the attack, stunned by how fast the larger fighter had closed in. Raising his axe high with a savage grin, the brawler roared for Zeno's death as he brought the weapon down with tremendous force. Beneath the shadow of the descending blade, Zeno remained still, his eyes narrowing as he quietly noted that his opponent had chosen to wield an axe. The axe-wielding brawler surged forward with a wall of blue energy trailing behind his charge, his strike aimed to end the match in an instant. A blinding ring of light erupted across the arena as Zeno released his own counter, the burst of energy tearing through the air toward his opponent. Caught in the explosion, the massive fighter threw his head back and screamed, his body racked by the force tearing through him. Zeno extended a single finger toward the falling giant, calm and unshaken as the last traces of energy crackled around his hand. The brawler crashed to the marble floor, sprawled out and unmoving beneath the arena's grand ceiling. Up in the stands, a nobleman gaped in disbelief at what he'd just witnessed, while the purple-suited announcer's grin sharpened with sudden interest. Raising his microphone, the announcer declared the match over, confirming Lucius Elminster as the victor. Somewhere in the crowd, a furious voice lamented losing 100 million zeni on the favorite, demanding to know how he could possibly fall to an untested child. The announcer mocked the result loudly, calling it a disappointing outcome for their first match, ridiculing how the loser had been finished in a single strike before proclaiming that a formidable newcomer had arrived. Back among the academy students, Hector urged Lilia to stop gnawing on the railing in frustration, insisting that her worry had been pointless all along. Wrapped in swirling green light, Zeno stood at the center of the arena as a voice in the crowd wondered aloud just who this fighter truly was. He examined his glowing fist, admitting to himself that the Reiki he'd gathered still wasn't sufficient to fully activate his fighting spirit circuit. A new banner flared to life across the arena, announcing the next matchup, Lucius Elminster against the renowned fighter known as Ballon d'Or Guillain. The announcer howled with excitement as round 2 began, questioning aloud just who this one-hit wonder of a boy really was. Watching his losses pile up, a bitter gambler cursed his luck before turning to his companion, urging him to throw everything behind the boy and go all in. Zeno drove his fist forward once more, shattering through his opponent's defense as a wave of dark energy burst apart around the impact. Throwing his arms wide in triumph, the announcer celebrated a third consecutive victory, hailing the 12-year-old as an unstoppable dark horse that no one could bring down. In the stands, an excitable girl squealed with delight and threw her winnings into the air, while Lilia and the others cheered Lucius's name with growing enthusiasm. Standing alone once more, Zeno studied the glow surrounding his hand and admitted quietly that it still wasn't enough, not yet. As blue light rained down around him like falling blades, his gaze hardened, eyes burning with quiet resolve as he prepared for whatever challenge awaited next. A shadowed figure emerged through a grand doorway, footsteps striking the marble floor with violent force as sparks of dark energy scattered around each stride. The announcer's confidence faltered as he stared at whoever had arrived, admitting no one had warned him a major VIP would be attending tonight. Descending a wide staircase into the arena below, the hooded newcomer's presence silenced the surrounding hall, his outline swallowed almost entirely in darkness. A young man's smirking face flashed briefly before the scene shifted to booted feet striking the ground with deliberate, unhurried steps, a crimson cape trailing behind him. His jaw tightened as his fist clenched hard enough to draw blood, tension radiating from his tightly coiled frame. Standing beneath the grand chandelier, Zeno stared upward toward the balcony above, his golden hair catching the light as he faced whoever now watched from the shadows. Seated high above the arena, an aging man with flowing white hair and burning red eyes glared down, his expression carved from cold authority and barely restrained fury. Zeno's eyes flared with sudden recognition and hatred the instant he identified the man's name, Atlas. The two locked gazes across the vast distance separating them, the entire hall shrinking around that single, charged moment. Neither looked away. Zeno's glare burned with quiet menace from below, while Atlas studied him from above with the same unshaken, merciless calm that had once sealed his fate in another life.